to you. It is 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Somebody wasn't listening yesterday. Dear James, please do an hour on why the leader of the Conservative Party thinks it's fine that a former neo-Nazi should stand as a Conservative candidate councillor in Somerset. I did that yesterday, Nikki. Honestly, although I am tempted to return to that territory today, Cami Badenoch, because she is, Cami Badenoch, has tripled down on the decision that we wrestled with a bit yesterday, and then after the show I wondered whether we needed to wrestle with it at all. And I'm not going to lie to you, I'm still not 150% clear on the subject. Neither am I 150% clear on this one, and I would very much like to be. The photographs. As a radio presenter, I don't normally like to acknowledge that pictures can speak 1,000 words, but sometimes, of course, they can. And I don't know which photographs have touched you the most. There are quite a few in circulation. You can, on the front page of one newspaper today, see one of PC Andrew Harper's wedding photographs with his now widow, of course, Lissy. And you can see holiday snaps of him in the papers as well, and just a sort of happy family photos. But oddly, I think the one that affected me the most is the picture of the two people whose fate is under discussion at the moment, being photographed in court, sort of smiling and grinning, and that engenders feelings that, well, let's just say they're not very pleasant. And I think that's probably the photograph that best distills the anger and the sense of injustice that accompanies the news, the fact that they are set to be released early. As indeed, and this is the point I think we need to acknowledge, as indeed is everybody else convicted of the same crime. Everybody else convicted of the same crime. So, I don't think we do this very often, but I think, going to nudge you today towards a very simple question, which is, what should Andy Burnham do? I've checked, and there's always room for more expert input, but I've checked, and it would be a relatively straightforward process for the Prime Minister to summon the Attorney General and the Justice Secretary and instruct them that, I don't normally like saying the names of people who've committed vile crimes, but I think you kind of have to in this case. Jesse Cole and Albert Bowers, and the reason why you have to name them is to distinguish them from Henry Long, who was driving the car, by which, and think of the car as a weapon effectively, Andrew Harper was killed. Bowers and Cole were passengers, so they are guilty. They have been convicted of manslaughter by consequence of being in the car that Henry Long used to kill PC Andrew Harper. And everybody else convicted of manslaughter in any circumstances at all would be eligible for early release, right? But Andy Burnham could summon the Attorney General and demand that an exception be made in this case. And in my emotional state, particularly if I'm just looking at that photograph I told you about of these two characters gurning, I would urge him to do so. I would, as indeed the family of Andrew Harper, and this morning the Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police, and already a Police Federation boss for PC Andrew Harper's colleagues, Eileen O'Connor, have all joined forces to make an incredibly powerful case for an exception to be made. The Prime Minister could do that. And, you know, I had a chat, I won't tell you which colleague it was this morning, because I haven't checked with them that they'd be comfortable having the conversation aired on the radio, but I found myself exploring the suggestion that he should just do it. Just do it. You know, the emotions are running so high, the case is so clear, the arguments are so powerful, that the bodies lining up, the people lining up against the Prime Minister on this are, I mean, you know, pretty hard to resist. Grieving mother, widow, Chief Constable, who was on duty that night, Police Federation boss, and you can hear some of what that Chief Constable James Hogg had to say to Nick Ferrari on LBC earlier this morning in a moment. You would if you were Andy Burnham. But then I sort of found myself in this conversation with this colleague. I found myself wondering, why would I be doing it if I was Andy Burnham? And I'm afraid I didn't like the answer that I came up with. Because if I was Andy Burnham, I would urge my Attorney General to keep these two characters in jail to make this story go away. I mean, 52%, because I want them to stay in jail for longer. But, of course, that would apply to everybody that's committed manslaughter, and it would apply to all of the people who are being cited today as imminent beneficiaries of the early release scheme, necessitated, remember, by 14 years of Tory policy. I mean, do I need to resurrect the ghost of Chris Grayling? Do you know, every single time I mention Chris Grayling's name, a byword for ministerial incompetence and failure, the consequences of which are now being felt and still being felt and will be felt for at least another generation, I find myself thinking, did Johnson put him in the Lords? And then I check, and I haven't checked yet, because I somehow managed to wash my mind of the knowledge. Did they put even Chris Grayling in? I mean, anybody gets a seat in the House of Lords under that lot. But even Chris Grayling in the House of Lords? And I think, no, surely not. Not sure. And then I remember who they did put in the House of Lords. And I'm almost certain that he did get a peerage, Chris Grayling, Lord Grayling of incompetence. Because, of course, you make this story go away and then another one comes along. Because you can't fill a bucket twice. And the reasons for prisons being full are not actually as complicated as some people believe. It is essentially down to the fact that, for largely political reasons, sentences have got longer. We lock more people up in England and Wales than any other country in Europe. And crucially, recalls. 29% increase in licence recalls last year, 48,327 people being recalled to jail, usually not for reoffending. Usually they're being recalled to jail for breaching probation, failure to contact probation services, not living at an approved address. What percentage do you think, because this matters, what percentage do you think of released prisoners being recalled to jail have committed another crime? Would you like to have a guess at that? Because I think these things really matter. Because I'm not Andy Burnham, you see, so I can't just do what my heart tells me to do with a 52-48 mix of pragmatism and opportunism. Opportunism, even. Make the story go away, but also indulge my emotional desire to see these people locked up for longer than they are currently going to be locked up. So why are prisons full? Well, you would not get that correct, I don't think. If I said to you, what percentage of released prisoners being recalled to jail are being recalled to jail because they've committed another crime? Just have a little guess, actually. I'll leave the inbox open. 03456060973 if you want to WhatsApp me, 84850 for a text. And just play. I mean, it's not a game, for goodness sake, but take it seriously. Give me your informed... And I've spoilt it slightly by saying that I don't think you'll get close to it, but tell me what you would have suggested before I made it clear that I find the figure horrifyingly low. So, Andy Burnham has a choice. And if he chooses to do what you and I, at the moment, probably want him to do, then a week from now, or 2 weeks from now, there will be another highly emotive case. There will be another cause célèbre. There will be, and I'm not making light of anybody's suffering, there will be another widow or another grieving mother on our television screens demanding that these criminals are exempted from the early release scheme. And then the killers of somebody who died alone and unmourned in a flat without their body being found for 6 months will be released early because nobody cares about the person that they killed. Nobody is available to be interviewed. No photographs have survived to be printed on the front page of The Sun, so they don't get early release, even though those killers tortured a homeless person, let's say, to death. Or if it was a police officer, another police officer, then the story would look almost identical and the pressure would feel exactly the same. And if the Prime Minister were to buckle now, then he would sort of have to buckle next time, wouldn't he? Wouldn't he? And, you know, journalism is journalism. It is not about facts and evidence. We all engage in emotions, and these are emotions that are very easy to stir. But they're not unique. There will be a child killer, or there will be a sex offender, and there will be people who are on the list already who were set to be released early before Andy Burnham became Prime Minister, who will now not be released as early. That doesn't matter if you're focusing on the cases that are exceptions to the new rule. So he could do this. He could summon the Attorney General, he could summon the Justice Secretary, and he could tell them to make an exception to the rule. Now, the rule, you know, elements of the rule have changed. If you murder an emergency service worker, then you will be treated differently from how you would be treated if you murdered a radio presenter or a farmer. You murder an emergency service worker, then Harper's Law will see you treated differently. Could possibly extend that to manslaughter moving forward. But it would be an exception to the rule to do this. And if you make one exception, then you open the floodgates to countless more. And that's why I mentioned journalism, because picture desks can be horribly cynical places, but they will be looking for the photogenic case that can be put on the front page of their newspaper and picked up by people like me and Nick and other broadcasters who arrive at the conclusion that this is outrageous, this is wrong. But what about all the other cases that stand comparison intellectually or statistically, but they're not as emotionally exciting, they're not as emotionally charged? So you get treated differently as a criminal if you have killed somebody who is, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm frightened to use a word, really, because I'm going to sound so cynical, but you get treated differently if you kill somebody whose story is going to engender more sympathy than somebody else's. And yet, if I was Andy Burnham, I'd still be tempted. And what I'd be doing is crossing my fingers and hoping that I'm not opening the floodgates. There's not going to be a case a week or a case a month of killers facing early release who will not be released early if we can get the right level of media outrage and the right level of public opinion. But Andy Burnham's job is to... what is Andy Burnham's job? Uphold the law. Not have exceptions to the rules that are in place. Change the rules by all means, but not just for one case or two killers. You'd have to change the rules for everybody. So, as I understand it, yeah, that's a good phrase. Thank you, Arthur. If your story goes under the radar, if the crime goes under the radar, you're not going to get this demand. And yet the natural justice being demanded would be identical. In the absence of the media spotlight, you could have a case that's gone under the radar that would tug your heartstrings and would boil your blood and would move you profoundly in all the ways that the case of PC Andrew Harper is moving you, is probably moving you. But that shouldn't really be... Can that be a reason for essentially not ripping up the rule book, but just suggesting that let's not open it this time? Let's not open the rule book this time. Let's throw away the key. 0345 60973 is the number that you need. Making legal exceptions for political convenience is a very, very dangerous path to go down, which is why I'm glad I'm not Prime Minister, because at 9:30 this morning I found myself thinking, yeah, I'd probably do that. I hadn't articulated it as making legal exceptions for political convenience. I put it like that. It doesn't sound so attractive suddenly. What are you doing? Oh, I'm responding to and indeed reflecting the anger of the public at this very particular case. What else are you doing? Well, technically, I suppose I'm making legal exceptions for political convenience. I'm riding relatively roughshod over the universality of the law because this case has really captured the public's attention. So what would you do if you were Andy Burnham? And you know how this programme works. Why 0345 6060 973. What would you do if you were Andy Burnham? And I am 99, well, maybe not 99, that's a bit risky. I'm 80%, 85, 90% clear that they could. The government could keep these two characters in jail for longer. They could remove them from this early release scheme. It would be, as I've said, an exception to the rule. So they could do it, but I've given some reasons why they might not. Indeed, I think I've given you the reasons why they currently are not. But what would you do and why? And of course, I'm asking what you think Andy Burnham should do. What do you think Andy Burnham should do? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's not quite as clear-cut as we thought it was, is it? It's not quite as clear-cut as we're being told it is. That's often the way. The gulf between tabloid newspaper sensibilities and the grim and often grisly business of government can be huge. But just in conclusion, God, I sound like a lawyer now, I do find the identity of some of the people on the side calling for Andy Burnham to make an exception, I find it significant. The fact that you have a chief constable of Thames Valley Police, the fact that you have the boss of the local police federation calling for this exception suggests to me that my concerns may be assuageable. Maybe it is possible to argue that, yeah, all right, it looks like an exception to prove the rule, but this case is so acutely different. This case is unique. Can you be so unique? This case is unique. And therefore you don't need to worry. So what would you do? What do you think Andy Burnham should do? That's not the same question as what would you do. I'd keep them locked up forever, but I'm not Prime Minister. If I was Prime Minister, I'd have to operate according to a very different set of priorities and principles. So what do you think Andy Burnham should do? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 10 is the time, and I wonder if a phrase popped into your mind during that introduction. It didn't pop into mine, and it should have done, because it's popped into plenty of people's who have been in touch via text. Hi James, one rule for media-friendly cases, another rule for everyone else. That sounds, says Bob in Durham, like two-tier justice to me. I thought the right-wing press were very much against that. Not just the right-wing press calling for action on this story. I mean, I'm pretty close to calling for it myself, but such is my curse. I'm thinking about it a little bit too deeply to make a sort of simplistic, knee-jerk conclusion. Wouldn't it be, says Alfred, two-tier justice then? Crimes for people with more sympathy and those with less sympathy, treated differently. Each victim must now fight for their own justice. That would be chaotic in my view. Elise says, I'm uncomfortable with exceptions. Aren't we against two-tier approaches to things? And Mark in Plymouth picks up the point, saying if he makes an exception here, then the Mail and the Express, etc., will find another 20 families of manslaughter victims. They're not interested in the families. They just want Burnham to U-turn so that they can chalk it up on the balance sheet. I hope you're wrong, Mark, but, 23 after 10 is the time. Chris is in Portsmouth. Chris, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. First-time caller.
Welcome.
So, thank you very much indeed. What would I do if I was Andy Burnham?
Or what should he do? Because I'm not sure I'm not sure that it's the same question. It might be, but at the moment I'm not sure that it is. But either you can answer either.
So what should he do? Firstly, this is a matter for the Home Secretary, not the Prime Minister, unless the Home Secretary isn't making the decisions that the Prime Minister is comfortable with. But maybe what he should be doing is saying, instead of just having a one-size-fits-all policy, those that are potentially eligible for early release should be treated on a case-by-case basis. So as you've said earlier on this morning, the two individuals that were in court smirking and laughing, if their attitude hasn't changed, if they haven't been reformed, if there is a risk of them committing additional offences when they are released from prison early, then the answer is no, you are not eligible for early release.
I think that is the case as it stands. I mean, you can't. I mean, smirking and laughing is not a criminal offence in any circumstances in this country. I suppose you could technically be done for contempt of court, but it would be a bit of a push. And if the authorities believe that you still pose a threat to the public, then then there would be grounds for keeping you in jail anyway. The problem is, because at first nod I agree with you, but the problem is when you say case-by-case basis, you're just using fancy words to describe some crimes, some cases being more media-friendly than others.
That's only if they get to the media in the first place.
Yeah, but no one's going to demand that the Prime Minister takes action if they don't.
But does the Prime Minister need to take action?
Well, that's what the phone-in's about. Look, I think that's a red herring, mate, respectfully.
Really?
Well, OK, let's talk about the government then. Andy Burnham is the one that wrote the article yesterday about what he has tried to do in collaboration with the Justice Secretary and the cases that they've decided to remove from the scheme, and his sadness, but he believes it would be wrong of him to add all cases like this. I don't think post-sentencing you can do it on a case-by-case basis. Otherwise, what's the point of courts?
True, but the issue here is it's not necessarily, and yes, it is the fault of many consecutive governments over the last multiple decades that we don't have sufficient places in. Well,
the explosion to breaking point has been relatively recent. I think the Tories closed 23 jails and ended their period of government with 500 more prison places than they had in the first place. The big change has been the length of sentencing, which again is done to appease the kind of journalism that is under discussion by us this morning, and also this huge number of people that are recalled to jail after being released. Only 22% of whom have actually reoffended. So 78% of prisoners being recalled to jail. And in the most recent research, they found that 101 people had been returned to custody in the same period. In the first 3 months of this year, for every 100 prisoners released, 101 were coming back into prison, and 22, give or take, of that 101 prisoners had reoffended. 78% of them had not. So none of that is on Andy Burnham's responsibility list. And I think we can both agree on reflection that post-sentencing treatment of case-by-case crimes is a ridiculous idea, Chris, because that's what the sentences are for, and they have to either they apply equally to everybody or they don't apply at all. They are just holding patterns until you get a big enough public campaign or a big enough media upset. And listen, my feelings are in the same place as yours, but as I think you've just discovered, my brain isn't. I don't see how you can argue for media-friendly cases being treated differently from cases that have gone under the radar, which is what everybody's doing, I think. Of course, if I'm wrong, 0345 606 0973. Honestly, you wait all morning for one Chris to come along, and then there's two in quick succession. The next one is in Chelmsford. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, hello, James.
Hello.
There's two sort of main points. One is the specific question you've asked, which is I don't think he should intervene. What he should do is explain the decision process, including what happens to them when they're out, in terms of they're not just let out and off they go. There must be a second stage. What is that? Is that tagging? Is that probation? What is it? And explain the process. But what I'm worried about overarchingly is this kind of issue is put up as a deflector in front of the main problems that we have behind.
As in prison overcrowding?
Yes. So, yes. I have a view that you need to stream this thing. You've got how many people in prison have got mental illness? How many people have got addiction? How many people are violent? If you've got a mental illness, there should be an outcome which is not standard prison. If you've got addiction, it should be an outcome which is not standard prison. If you're violent, it should be. If you're not addicted, you're not ill, and you're not violent, then you shouldn't be in prison. There should be another process. It's not as simple. I don't say this is simple, but if we start to say that if someone's got mental illness or addiction, if we can cure that, isn't that about stopping reoffending? And
yes,
if
of course
we can do
it is.
that in a setting which is...
Yeah, and if it's costing about £65,000 a year at the moment per prisoner, I beg your pardon, £56,618 per prisoner per year, according to His Majesty's Prison and Probation Service, the idea that sort of money couldn't be spent more wisely or more effectively is almost irresistible. Of course, we know simultaneously that the prison service and the probation service have been completely filleted by Chris Grayling and other Tory ministers.
Absolutely. So if you release people into a world where they've got no structure, no ability, no format, no job, no approach, no framework to hang on to. They'll just go back, and then we're just putting them out, put them back, put them out, put them back, put them out, put them back, and
well, that's what we're doing. I can't
believe
this figure. It's probably the thing that shocked me most in terms of the statistics rather than the emotions. Only 22% of prisoners that are recalled to jail after being released are recalled because of reoffending. The rest have just breached probation conditions. So they might have missed a meeting or failed to live at an approved address. Not behaviour that I am condoning or encouraging, but behaviour that is obviously not as serious as reoffending. Thank you, Chris. Where are we then? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I mean, Idiot's Corner is always a little bit busy on mornings like this, but things that you need to be clear about. The government can do this, but if they did do it, they would be prioritising media-friendly cases over cases that have not generated public support and media campaigns. And, one part of me could live with that, but what that part of me has to do is wonder what happens next. 2 weeks down the line, there's another one. And suddenly the Justice Secretary is essentially a puppet on strings that are being pulled by newspaper editors, almost all of whom, of course, are sworn enemies of the current government. These are details that matter if you want to arrive at an informed opinion rather than the sort of opinion that those paper editors generally prefer. 10:31 is the time. Dominic Ellis has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:34. Just to clarify something, actually, I think I got this wrong. If a crime comparable to the killing of Andrew Harper were to happen today, then whether it were manslaughter or murder, the culprits would get mandatory life sentences. To give you the correct quote, it would be mandatory life sentences under Harper's law for, quotes, anyone who commits the manslaughter of an emergency worker on duty, including police, prison officers, firefighters and paramedics, while carrying out another crime unless there are truly exceptional circumstances. That was added to the statute book in April of 2022. Largely, according to the Home Secretary and Justice Secretary at the time, Priti Patel and Dominic Raab, good Lord, remember them, largely because of the campaign that PC Harper had conducted. And look, for the absolute avoidance of doubt, if you've got a problem with that law, I've got a problem with you. I know it sort of needs a bit of an ethical justification, but I think that people like, emergency service workers deserve a different treatment from the rest of us. I know we'll all be able to think of a job that is incredibly powerful and valuable, even in the volunteer sector, perhaps. But, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If you kill a police officer while committing another crime, you should be held, I think, to a higher account. You should be punished more severely than if you kill somebody who is not and has not dedicated their working life to looking after the rest of us. That's just me. Maybe a little bit dewy-eyed, maybe a little bit sentimental, but I passionately believe that. As you'll know, if you've listened to this programme for a long time, I hold the emergency services in the highest regard, even though I am never, ever blind to the corruption or indeed the institutional racism that can run through some elements of them. So if it happened now, that we would not be having this conversation. Political action has been taken to make sure that if characters as repellent as these two were to be emulated at some point in the future, they would be facing a mandatory life sentence. But these two are not, because they were sentenced under the previous law. And what this campaign is effectively doing, despite the support of, as you just heard in the news, the Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police and the Police Federation boss for Andrew Harper's colleagues, despite their support for it, what they are calling for is for these two scumbags to be held essentially to a law that didn't exist when they were sentenced by our criminal justice system. But I wonder whether the specifics of that law actually shut down some of the worries that we had at 10 o'clock. So you worry that a less media-friendly case is not going to get this kind of outpouring. But I can't quite imagine the manslaughter of a police officer or a firefighter or a paramedic or a prison officer. I can't quite imagine that not breaching this sort of threshold. So what you're really doing, if you summon the Attorney General, is saying, listen, we can do this because we make the laws. Let's treat these two characters as if the law already existed when they committed the crime. I think I could live with that. I'm pretty sure that's what Jason Hogg, the Chief Constable, I think that is one of the roots of his thinking, as he explained to Nick Ferrari earlier this morning on LBC. Stay where you are, John, and indeed Laura, because I just want you to hear this little roundup of some of Jason Hogg's thinking. This is, as I say, the Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police talking to Nick Ferrari about an hour ago.
I do think there are some choices here, and I would urge the government to reconsider their position, because I'm worried about the impact on the morale of policing across the UK, but also wider confidence from the public in the criminal justice system. Policing is a family, and it is difficult to underestimate the impact of the murder of a police officer has on policing. So, but just tomorrow I'll be riding with 450 police officers, staff and people who've lost loved ones on a charity ride, which we do every year to raise money for the families, for the children of officers who were killed in the line of duty. It is part of the police culture and psyche, really. Is it really important to us? I remember Andrew all the time, and we talk about him often. If it's not retrospective, I understand that, but it is perverse, because of that law came into existence, that we are now releasing the killers of Andrew Harper earlier than they would have been. That just seems to make no sense. And officers on Monday night were asking me, why are they being released early? What can I say? What can I say to my people?
Well, I mean, I think you say, because that is how people who committed that crime are treated under the law as it stood at the time that they committed the crime, with the government's early release scheme compounding that scenario. When they were sentenced, the government's early release scheme was not in place, so it would not have delivered the outcome that we are currently contemplating. But it would apply equally to everybody who committed manslaughter. There would not be an exemption for people who committed the manslaughter of a police officer, or indeed a prison officer, a firefighter, or a paramedic. But if my concern is precedent, if I'm worried that if they keep these two characters banged up, then next week the newspapers will get another case, I wonder whether that actually is as powerful as I thought it was at 10 o'clock, because of the specifics of Harper's Law. Police officers, prison officers, firefighters, paramedics. If you are currently in jail for the manslaughter of one of those, you're not on the early release scheme. And that's all of you, by the way. It's not just these two. What should Andy Burnham do? Retrospectively apply Harper's Law to all people currently in jail serving sentences for the manslaughter of police officers, prison officers, firefighters and paramedics. And immediately I get a message off Keir, not that one, saying, I've been a paramedic for 30 years, James, and I'm afraid I don't agree with you on this one. Murder is murder, or indeed manslaughter is manslaughter. It should be irrelevant what work or career you choose. I think that's a different conversation, isn't it? Because we've already passed Harper's Law. So we live in a world today, we live in a country, a society where that's not true, Keir. I know you know this, I'm just working out my own thoughts. We live in a country where Harper's Law is law. Mandatory life sentences for anyone who commits the manslaughter of an emergency worker on duty. I mean, again, letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. What if you accost a burglar off duty? What if you're on your way home, or you just sort of rugby tackle a shoplifter who turns around and stabs you? You're off duty. The shoplifter is not getting a mandatory life sentence. I mean, that's the problem with laws. They are made by humans. They are fallible. And if we introduce this one retrospectively, what's to stop calls and campaigns for lots of other laws to be introduced retrospectively? God forbid any fascists ever end up in power, but they could retrospectively introduce a death penalty and start killing people convicted of crimes that they consider to be particular, that perhaps we all consider to be particularly abhorrent. But we live under the law of the moment, not just the law of the land, but the law of the moment. But James Hogg's the Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police, and he makes a powerful case. What should Andy Burnham do? John's in Swindon. John, what do you reckon?
Right, well, as I said earlier to your researcher, I used to be a Thames Valley officer, and Andy Harper was killed on my old beat.
Good Lord.
I didn't know him. I retired years before that.
Okay.
But what I think's happened is someone's drawn a line through a spreadsheet and they've said, anyone above this line, early release. They've included killers. They should never, ever have included anyone who's responsible for taking a life, irrespective of whether they're an emergency service worker or a normal member of the public. It should never be up for the early release. They should serve the sentence that they've been sentenced to. I listened to Chief Constable Hogg this morning, and what a bloke. What a brilliant
Very
interview.
Powerful, wasn't it? Very
but I
powerful.
don't think he was calling for an exception. I'm sure he said all killers, something along those lines.
Killers of emergency service workers.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Harper's Law came in, as you say, later. So, and you can't go retrospective. But I know there are prison places there. There are prison places. There's loads of empty spaces in Dartmoor at the moment because they had a detection of radon gas. So there's at least around 200 cells there they can refill.
We need to be a little bit careful here because your knowledge is obviously important, but it sort of beggars belief that they are not aware of what you described. More than half of all prisons, which I think is 75, are currently operating above their intended capacity.
Yes.
So let's say there are 200 spaces in Dartmoor. The first people that should move into those cells are the people who are currently in overcapacity prisons.
Yeah.
So they're not actually spaces at all. It's just, I know it's logistical. You've got 3,359 available prison spaces in England and Wales as of June, on top of a prison population of 86,000. 1 in 6 of them have fewer than 10 spaces available. So you're never going to have it run like a kind of the tightest ship imaginable. But no. I don't think cell management is an answer to the problems that we're discussing, and I don't think you do either, to be honest, John.
Well, there's 400 cells available. There always are 400 cells kept for remand prisoners available.
But they are kept for remand prisoners.
They are kept for remand prisoners, but why are we remanding certain people in custody? We need to look at... Because
we think they pose a threat to the public, or they might be a flight risk.
Or they might flee.
Yeah.
There's plenty of prisoners in... There's also prisoners in of indeterminate sentence. I'm told there's 3,000 of them of indeterminate sentence, many of which are no threat to the public, but because they receive these indeterminate sentences, they haven't been released.
Yeah, this is also true. I think Dartmoor is full of radon gas at the moment. That's part of the reason why it may have some empty cells.
Yeah, but every house in that part of Devon is. You know, we lived down there for a while. We had radon gas detectors.
All right, so chalk it up as a detail, but just in case anyone listening was unaware of the reason why they're not putting people in those environments, that is the reason why. Also, of course, if you're in prison, you don't have quite as much freedom to go for a walk and get some fresh air as everybody else does. But that is by the by. What you're suggesting is probably not something that Andy Burnham can do tomorrow, which is to review indeterminate sentences. And of course, the prison officers would be breathing in the radon gas as well, not just the prisoners, in case anybody's thinking, I'll stuff them. He can't do that overnight. What you're nudging us towards, I sense, is the idea that people serving the kind of crimes that we or you consider to be trivial should not be in prison or should be released even earlier.
Right. Now, I can think of 2 examples straight away that I have personal knowledge of. People trying to swap points on driving licences.
Yeah, so if they don't get jailed, we'll all do it.
And but they've been jailed for contempt of court or for conspiracy to pervert the course of justice.
Yeah.
But are they a danger to the public?
That's what... I don't want to get the wrong politician down here. Who was married to Vicky Pryce? That's what they went down for, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the one, yeah.
And, well, no, I don't know if they're a danger to the public, but that's not the only reason for sentencing. If you don't get sent to jail for lying about tickets on points on your driving licence, then we will all lie about points on our driving licence.
But there are other penalties.
You can set yourself up online, John, and say, give me 50 quid, I'll take all your points.
Yeah, but there are other penalties for people like that you can use. You don't have to go to prison.
No. And some people don't.
These 2 were first-time offenders.
And Chris Huhn it was, of course. Some people do, and some people don't. So, again, I don't know how helpful it is when addressing the big picture to assemble a tapestry of lots of little pictures. So, in terms of the principles that we're discussing this morning, retrospectively applying Harper's Law to everybody who is currently serving a sentence for the manslaughter of an emergency service worker would be right or wrong?
I don't think it'll be right, because you can't retrospectively...
No, you see, that's the problem then.
Because, I read this morning, there's a woman whose son was murdered,
Yes.
and his murderer's getting out, his manslaughter, and he's getting out after a year, according to this new...
Well, manslaughter, as you know, is a very broad description.
Yeah.
It involves, absolute accidents as well, where you're considered to be responsible because you didn't, wire a plug properly or something like that. I'm not making light of any situation, but there's manslaughter and there's manslaughter, which is why it doesn't have a fixed sentence unless it's the manslaughter of an emergency worker while committing another crime, and then you get a mandatory life sentence. So why not apply this retrospectively? What is your objection to the retrospective application of laws?
Well, it sets a precedent, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
As you said.
Exactly.
The other issue is, how many prisoners have we got that are going to be deported at the end of their sentence? My information was there was over 1,100 in British prisons.
Yeah. So deport them sooner.
Why deport them straight?
You need treaties with the relevant countries. It would involve bringing British criminals back here. And of course, just because you may be a foreign national doesn't mean that you haven't got a life here. And again, we'd be back to what if they've been locked up for swapping points on a driving licence, John? Then that big number that you've just cited doesn't really matter, because I don't think you think anybody should be deported for swapping points on a driving licence if you don't think they should be jailed. Do you?
Well, no, but
you see? So, again, I'm thinking that, the little pictures are anecdotal and powerful, but do they really change the big picture? And to be fair to Andy Burnham, who has done what some people are suggesting he should do, which is speak to us as if we are grown-ups, he wrote yesterday, I read out much of the article, I have asked the Justice Secretary to review the indefinite sentences handed out between 2005 and 2012, and also the ones that are called imprisonment for public protection. This has left many hundreds of people in prison since they were young, but without any prospect of release, despite having already served very long sentences. This isn't a gotcha, John, but did you know that the Prime Minister had already announced the thing that you rang up to say he should announce?
I did, but I still think... But
why are you calling on him to announce it then, if he's already announced it?
No. What I'm saying is, I think somebody within the Justice Department, not necessarily the Minister, but somebody has simply drawn a line and said...
No, I know that was the first bit that you said, but your solution to part of the problem was to have a look at the indeterminate sentences, and lo and behold, I'd forgotten that I read yesterday he already has. He's already announced that the Justice Secretary should do that. So they're looking at all of the things that, if you like, ease the burden of overpopulation in prisons. That's not really the challenge on his desk this morning. That's a philosophical or ethical challenge that you just nailed, I think, actually, by pointing out that a precedent would be set. I can still live with it, though. But then I was never a copper like you. It's 10 to 11.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:53 is the time, and there it is, a rather more complicated picture than much of the coverage allows. But it is clearly complicated. I mean, it is clearly quite straightforward in some senses. The Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police adamant that the two men guilty of the manslaughter of his former colleague, PC Andrew Harper, his late colleague, PC Andrew Harper, should not be beneficiaries of an early release scheme. The problem is that, I suppose, to pick up on the point John in Swindon just made, you're just drawing a line. It's the same line. You're just drawing it in a slightly different place. How many people, this is a genuine question, how many people profoundly exercised by this case would be comfortable with much fewer people being sent to jail? For different kinds of crimes, for theft, for burglary. You can find online rhetoric that suggests people who steal mobile phones should be strung up from the nearest lamppost. I don't know what the crossover is. It's a genuine question. You can't answer it. It's a genuine curiosity about that Venn diagram, because right-wing sensibilities dismiss the reality of rehabilitation, don't care about things like literacy levels and mental health and neurodiversity among prisoners, are not particularly interested in how environment and nurture and deprivation drive crime. They just want lots of people to be locked up for as long as possible. That is, if you like, the kind of thumbnail sketch of most attitudes to criminal justice that would be loosely described as extremely right-wing. Not all right-wingers subscribe to this school of thought, of course, but it's extremely right-wing ideology, lock them up. Don't spare me the bleeding heart liberalism about what a terrible childhood they had, or how the fact that they can't read or left school without any qualifications meant they had little choice but to fall down the holes that they fell down, get rid of it. So I don't know how many people who are passionate about Andrew Harper's case and are adamant that he should be, that his killers should stay in jail, would also accept that in order to keep these killers in jail, as our last caller was arguing, I thought quite powerfully, you should let lots of other people out or not send them in the first place. You see? Same people. Is it? I don't know. I honestly don't know. So what would you do? Or indeed, what do you think Andy Burnham should? Laura is in Southampton. Laura, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say I don't pretend to know all the ins and outs.
Nobody does. Nobody does, Laura.
But I think Andy Burnham should not apply the law retrospectively. And I'd like to say I'm deeply uncomfortable with the conclusion I've drawn, because I know that there are humans at the end of this process, and justice is important. But if you set this precedent, that's when we, as a country, as governance bodies, we start picking at the edges and we start inspecting it more closely. And I think whenever you apply a sticking plaster, which this would be, what that does is to reduce the impetus and the priority of addressing the core issue, which isn't going to be lessened. Our capacity as a country to address the problems facing us is I think, quite limited, and we need to maintain our energies at the root of the issue.
I wonder whether to knit together the point you make with the point that John in Swindon made a moment ago. A third of the prisoners released early between January and March, or just shy of 10,000 of them. A third of them were serving sentences of 6 months or less. And what's the point of a sentence of 6 months or less, do you think?
I guess for a first-time offender, that might be...
Short, sharp, shot.
Yeah.
I don't know, I mean, this is what I mean, because these are me now being guilty of bringing small stories to the table when we're trying to solve the big story. But for you, it would be an exception, and an exception becomes a precedent, and a precedent is a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the correct way of and this is my fault, I've been corrected by Alan, retroactively rather than retrospectively. But yeah, I mean, it is a distraction from the overcrowding. I think there's probably something in the argument that the newspapers who were silent while the Tories created the prisons crisis and the criminal justice system itself ground to a shuddering halt, both before COVID and then made much worse by COVID. They've suddenly discovered their crusading credentials on this case, but they are largely silent about the context that has created the necessity of an early release scheme. They're just getting very, very exercised about these two beneficiaries of the early release scheme, and that is a theme coming through on almost all my calls today. We can talk about this until the cows come home, but what we really need to and we did this on yesterday's programme, is look at the much bigger picture of what the Labour government inherited from Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, David Cameron and indeed Theresa May. And if you doubt that that's pertinent, just speak to the former Conservative Justice Secretary Alex Chalk about what he was telling Rishi Sunak shortly before Rishi Sunak, very surprisingly, decided to call an early election, because his own Justice Secretary, for the avoidance of doubt, was telling him that if we don't introduce an early release scheme ASAP, we will be on our hands and knees praying for the criminal justice system. So Rishi Sunak didn't introduce an early release scheme. He called a general election instead, shortly after which Keir Starmer introduced precisely the scheme that the Tory secretary had called for.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 11, and I'm going to derive some confidence from the last conversation. And stop sending me pictures of Kemi Badenoch dressed as a police officer and asking me whether or not it's illegal to impersonate a police officer. I think if you're a politician, you're allowed to borrow the tabard. Is it called a tabard? It's not a tabard. What's it called, that thing? Like there's a word for it, not a gilet. Yeah, the high-vis thing. It's got a special word. Is it a tabard? Is it a tabard? I think it might be a tabard. Anyway, stop sending me pictures of Kemi Badenoch dressed as a police officer and asking me whether or not it's illegal to impersonate a police officer. It's not as if she knocked anyone's door in, is it? Single-handedly. Yeah. I'm going to derive confidence from the conversation that we had in the last hour, which I thought was really sensible and reasoned. And even though there was quite a lot of disagreement, it was never less than civilised. And I'm going to carry that confidence into an area, into a conversation that I have, I think, because you never know for sure, but I think I have been emotionally cowed from discussing this issue in the past by the scale of upset that I cause. And remember, I'm happy to upset you if I'm doing it on purpose. I don't think that, it's a defence to say, oh, I was only joking. I think most of us grow out of claiming that the thing we've done that was really offensive was just a joke and it's your fault for not seeing the funny side. We grow out of that before we get into the sixth form. But I do sometimes cause enormous upset, which disturbs me slightly. And I know that it is very traditional for radio phone-in hosts to have very pungent opinions about the transgender issue, about transgender people. You see that? I've already offended someone. I'm not exaggerating and I'm not asking you to get your tiny violin out, but even by saying the transgender issue, I will have offended some people. Now, those aren't the people whose offence is greatest and loudest when I wade into this subject. They are the people that accuse me of being a misogynist or accuse me of being all manner of things, to be honest with you. And I think probably only alongside Israel's activities in the West Bank, my ability to upset everybody when I wade into a subject from both sides. So you've got two sides who are passionately opposed to each other, and then I stick my two penneth in and I manage to upset all of you equally, sometimes it seems. And sometimes I'll upset one side more than the other, and other times I'll upset the other side more than that side. Probably talking about trans people is up there with the Middle East for me in causing incredible anger and upset. Now, there are two reasons why I'm going back into it today. One is that I'm not on Twitter anymore, so it doesn't really touch me. If you want to cut comments I make out of context or pretend that I've said something with my full chest when 10 seconds previously I'd said, of course, on the other hand, many people believe, and then you just cut that and clip me saying what many people believe and you make it look like I believe it and I won't brook any, or you clip up a phone call but not all of it. First time I waded into this, just for context, the first time this blew up on me was when I didn't even know, and this is to my eternal regret really rather than embarrassment, I had no idea that it was already a kind of cottage industry, really, for some people. And I'd been shopping with one of my daughters, and I had been in the changing room, helping her with cubicles and doors, and I just mentioned that in passing as being one of the wrinkles in a man ban on all spaces. And that wasn't even a trans thing. That was just, well, of course, if there's doors and cubicles and everything is private. I mean, I go to toilets in pubs where there's a woman in the next door cubicle. So how can a clothes shop be any different? And that blew up in my face. And then it blew up again a couple of years later. So I'm conscious of all of this, but I'm also conscious of an element perhaps of cowardice, actually. Why aren't you talking about this issue, James? I'm not sure how important it is. Really? It's desperately important to some people. I know, but I'm not sure how many of them there actually are. They're just incredibly loud and incredibly noisy. I'm thinking now of the people who would be loosely described as anti-trans. But if you are trans, then you are, by definition, profoundly vulnerable. And that's upset someone. Someone is now shouting at the radio, there's no such thing. They don't exist. There's no such thing. They're men. So do you see what I mean? You cannot, as with the sort of early days of Israel's activities in Gaza after the horrific atrocities of October the 7th, when you acknowledged both the horrific atrocities of October the 7th and the dangers of what it would mean for Israel and the world if Benjamin Netanyahu was free to pursue his own murderous agendas in Gaza, you ended up upsetting everybody. For a while, everyone would just shout, what about Hamas, when you were critiquing Israel? Whereas, of course, when you're critiquing Hamas, much quieter voices start shouting, what about Netanyahu? So I will quite possibly upset everybody. And I have to talk about it because, well, A, it is in the news today, and B, it is a story about our society, about ourselves, and that is what we talk about every day. So I think we've reached the point now that I always said we would reach, and even that comment is possibly controversial. I'll stop self-editing now. I'll stop pointing out what your likely response might be to a conversation or a comment that I make, but conversation today is about the Equality and Human Rights Commission's revised statutory code of practice, offering guidance on single-sex spaces. It's one of Baroness Faulkner's last acts before leaving office. She has said that the law would remain unenforced by the equalities regulator because its meagre funding meant it could not take up the fight on behalf of women. So you've got a 342-page code setting out how to implement last year's Supreme Court ruling in the For Women Scotland versus the Scottish Ministers. And it essentially ring-fenced biological sex. So if you were born as a biological male, you would not be permitted to enter female-only spaces. And my problem has always been the implementation of that rule. And my problems, plural, have, I hope, been both sensitive and authentic. For example, who is going to check? And I went through a period of thinking that this was a sort of glib throwaway. Who's actually going to check the contents, not to be facetious, of your underwear? Who's going to check the contents of your underwear? We all know people who, by accident or design, do not look like textbook versions of their biological sex. They are outliers on the plotted graph, if you like. We know what the median is, but we also know that there will be some people who are biologically male who can pass for women, and some people who are biologically female who can pass for men. So who is going to check? Whose suspicions are going to be indulged, whose accusations are going to be investigated? This has always been the thing that worries me. If it's a female-only space and you have... So let me carry on, actually. Let me put a few other things on the table before I throw open the phone lines. The question that I think I'm going to ask is, what do you think is going to happen? To which I suspect the answer might be nothing, actually. But here are the things that I feel. Transgender women should not be treated like me in public spaces. I am not a cis woman, so I don't know that I have the agency to say they should be allowed into female-only spaces. I don't know what a referendum would deliver on that, but let's say 52% of women said we're perfectly happy with trans women using our facilities, and 48% said no. Can you imagine half of the country having to do something they really don't want to do because 52% of them decided that it was a good... Could you imagine how awful that would be? Particularly if the 52%, when they actually sat down and thought about it or saw the consequences of what they'd voted for, decided that they'd made a mistake and wanted to change their mind. So as a man, I don't think I can say to you as a biological woman that you should open the doors of your facilities to transgender women. I don't think I can say that. I'm pretty sure that if I was a woman, I would say it. And you may disagree with me. You may think this is poor allyship or this is hair splitting, but I'm a bloke. And I don't think it is my place to say to women who are uncomfortable that they have to deal with their discomfort. And I'd even qualify that. The discomfort is one of two things. There are fears about men pretending to be transgender in order to access women's spaces for reasons, whether of sexual gratification or otherwise. And that seems to me to be something that everybody should be concerned about. If a woman says to you, look, I'm very worried that that person there is pretending to be a trans woman in order to, peer under the door of the toilet or something, then that is a valid concern and that person should be protected. But I don't know how big that problem is. And there are cases, of course there are cases, of men who seem to be doing precisely that, and not just in order to gain access to women's spaces, but sometimes to evade justice or to get into a women's prison, because it might be a slightly easier sentence to serve than in a men's prison. So what we could loosely call the liars. So because there are liars, the people who are telling the truth should be treated like liars. The only way we can be sure to catch all the liars is by treating everybody who says that they are trans as if they are a liar. And that, of course, leads some people to the space in which they will insist that there's no such thing, which means that someone who looks like a woman, a biological woman, has to go into the gents and take their chances in the gents. And I don't think anybody wants that either, do they? One of the maddest things about this is that some people seem to think it's really simple. And yet I've already demonstrated to you how complicated it is. You can pretend it's simple by shouting at a politician, can a woman have a penis? That's how you pretend that it's simple. To which, the answer is it depends on definitions. Biologically, no. Socially, probably, but that's not really the point. The point is, what do we do with that person there who looks, to all intents and purposes, like a woman, but there's someone else in the toilets who thinks that they might be a man, so who's going to check? And there's someone over there who looks like a man. You know, Quentin Letts calls Sandy Toksvig Sir Sandy Toksvig, I presume because she's a lesbian. So, you know, the idea, Quentin Letts, who earlier this week was covering a prime ministerial speech by talking about the length of the skirt of a woman sitting in the front row. So the idea that this is clear-cut seems to me to be ridiculous. There is a human being over there who is a biological woman, but who could probably get into a male-only club because of the way that they look, dress and present. So they walk into the toilet and a woman says, I don't like that. What do you do? What do you do? So, as it stands, this is now law. Biological men or trans women or both are no longer allowed into designated single-sex spaces for women. But it's unenforceable because, I mean, goodness knows how it would be enforced, but it's unenforceable. So, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think is going to happen? Just on a shallower level, when I talk to female friends and family about mixed facilities, the general feeling is it's all right if it's in an art gallery or a theatre, but I hate it when it's in a pub. The reason being that men go into rooms where there are designated cubicles for men and women to relieve themselves, and the men might leave the door open while they're weeing, and they might well wee all over the floor. So that there are sort of hygiene issues here that highlight some of the problems with the probable solution to the issue. But my question has always been, who is going to check? And you may be able to explain to me why that's the wrong question or pointless, or you may have an easy answer to it that takes away all of my concerns. But at first glance, at today's conclusions, at today's code, at first glance, the warning from Baroness Faulkner, if that's the word you prefer, that this cannot be enforced. Which is what, and I don't want to sound like that person, that's what I've been saying all along. And somehow managing to upset everybody. That's probably a personality defect rather than a philosophical consequence. But this is what I've been saying all along. You know, I've interviewed trans women who I wouldn't in a month of Sundays have known that they were born male. And I don't know, as one pointed out to me actually, when I was still on Twitter, I don't know whether or not they've had an operation to remove the penis they were born with. I don't know. And here's the weird thing. I don't want to know. I don't care. I don't care. Well, I mean, some people really care. I don't care. But I do care about the woman who would feel threatened, probably not by that human being using the same facilities that they're using, but by the man who is pretending to be trans in order to access private spaces. So how are you going to check? How is this going to work? And listen, there are two ways to answer this question. You can answer this either speculatively, like, this is probably what's going to happen, to which my answer is nothing. Everything's going to carry on exactly as it is. Or you might think that there is going to be more challenge now in female-only spaces, to which I would cautiously suggest that the people most likely to be challenged are biological women who pass for male, who can pass for male. some of whom may not even know that they look quite male to that woman over there who's very upset that they're in the ladies. I don't know. Are there going to be more people called out? Where do trans men go? To the toilet. If you take this legislation to its natural and logical conclusion, they're no longer allowed in male-only spaces. So a transgender male has to go into the ladies. A transgender male looks like a man, looks like a biological man. So the transgender man who goes into the ladies is one of the first people to get called out and investigated by the underpants police, and lo and behold, they've got a penis. So where do they go? They go back to the gents. I mean, it can't work, can it? And this is, I think, why I've managed over the years to upset everybody, because it's so complicated. And, of course, as is often the case with very, very big public debates, the people with the most invested in the debate, the people with the loudest voices, think it's really simple. And that's why you upset everyone, by suggesting that it isn't. Because it is almost tribal. It's almost a part of identity. And because I'm not a woman, I can't say, well, look, some of us are going to be a little bit upset by this, but I think in the greater scheme of things, we'll just have to suck it up and accept that trans women can come into female-only spaces. And hopefully we'll be able to spot the wrong ones who are doing it in order to indulge their own perversions, and we can all join forces to beat them up. I mean, if I was a woman. Trans men don't have penis. I got that a bit wrong. Sorry. So the trans man goes into the ladies because he's no longer allowed in the gents, and gets challenged and has his underpants checked, and he hasn't got a penis. He's a biological female. So the person who looks more like a man than I do gets to stay in the ladies. But who is going to check? How is this going to... I told you, I complicated myself now. But and just if you're interested in my own relationship with this issue, because I don't like feeling that I'm frightened of talking about something anymore, but I'm only human, and I am still frightened about talking about this, which I suppose is the point of some of the abuse that you receive. I think part of my problem, or my perceived problem, was the fact that I was essentially introduced to transgenderism by a trans man. My first experiences of it and conversations about it were with a trans man. And then I had the pleasure of interviewing a trans woman who broadened my horizons, and it meant that I always approached the issue in a kind of 50-50 kind of way. But no one's really got a problem with trans men. No bloke is going to say to a trans man, get out of my toilets. I mean, for a start, you can't use the urinal, so you're going to go into a cubicle anyway, and nobody's going to have any grounds to be suspicious. Do you see what I mean? It's as if the principles speak to an entirely different debate from the pragmatics of this. The principles, should a human being with a penis be allowed into the ladies? God, no, would be the gut response, right? But what if you would never in a month of Sundays guess that person had a penis? Then what are you going to do? How's it going to be policed? And where would you rather go? If you looked like a woman but had a penis in your pants, would you go into the gents and take your chances there with your shoulder-length long hair? Or would you just pop into the ladies, keep yourself to yourself, have a quick pee and leave again? Do you see what I mean? If you think I'm not making any sense at all, then 03456060973. You can tell that I'm a little uncomfortable on this territory because my introduction has taken 23 minutes.
James O'Brien on LBC.
24 minutes after 11, and I wonder if we should have a referendum. That's some words you never thought I'd say. But again, what if the result was 52-48? I mean, who can seriously argue that people would have to suck up something that is, to their mind, absolutely ridiculous just because 52% of the population had been persuaded that it was a good idea? I do not know, but I do want to have this conversation in the spirit of this programme, openly, freely and fairly. Lil is in Wroughton in Wiltshire. Lil, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. So I am a 50-year-old cisgender woman, so my biological sex and my chosen gender align.
Yes.
I am also a woman who has PMOS, which is the new term for polycystic ovary syndrome.
Okay.
This means that although all of my internal and external genitalia is female, and I have, a large chest. I have breasts. I also have what's perceived as male pattern baldness, and I have facial hair, which I shave.
Okay.
I have been challenged on numerous occasions over the years since the anti-trans rhetoric started for being a woman who doesn't look woman enough in female-only spaces. I've been in an upscale hotel in London, and I've had women call security on me to remove me from toilets. I have been challenged in Newcastle Central Station. I have been challenged in department stores.
Wow.
And it is... I'm sorry that my voice is a little bit shaky.
Of course it is.
Because it has a massive impact. And I have absolutely no problem with trans women being in women's spaces. I've never had an issue with a trans woman in a woman's space. I have had issues with gender-critical women in women's spaces telling me that I don't belong and I need to get out.
How do they do it? And I know that you've had multiple experiences, but what unites them? What's the sort of usual scenario?
This is...
or just pick one. Just describe one to me if it's easier.
So in Newcastle Central Station, I had a woman earnestly telling me, tapping me on the shoulder and saying, "You can't be in here, this is the ladies." To which I said, "I know, that's why I'm here."
Yeah.
When security were called on me in London, I asked the security guards how they wished me to identify themselves. Did they want me to demonstrate physically,
yes.
Or did they want to see my driving licence?
Oh, yes.
I now, and it's not just this whole anti-trans rhetoric has exposed it. I now get harassment in the street, in the area where I live, to people misgendering me as a form of harassment because I do not look woman enough for them, and they are emboldened by the anti-trans movement, who think that it is okay now to harass 50-year-old women in the street.
And you are more likely to be a target of that harassment than a biological male who passes very convincingly, for want of a better word, than as a female. Yeah,
some of my trans friends look more...
That's what I was alluding to. Yes.
Feminine than I do. They pass better than I do.
And you, I mean, just picking over what you've already said, you really do feel that your personal experiences have deteriorated since the national debate gathered pace and volume.
Yes, since there are now 51 anti-trans organisations who are pushing this rhetoric. It's well funded.
So what's going to happen now? Now that, we know that essentially society has caught up with the fact that implementing what the people you refer to want to have implemented is technically impossible. You've known that all along, of course, and you're at a horribly sharp end of that experience that no one can actually dispute. But what do you think is going to happen now that the rest of the world, it seems to be catching up with what you've always known to be true?
I think we're going to see increased levels of harassment. And I think we're going to start to see a pushback and a challenge, because now this isn't law, this is guidance, this is statutory guidance, it's not legislation. Yes. It is not illegal for a person to enter a toilet or changing room of that's not aligned with their biological gender. This is guidance. But if it happens to me now, I am going to push back. If a woman or if anyone challenges me for going into the space that I'm supposed to be in, I'm going to take their details. I'm going to report them for harassment. I'm going to use, just as they being the gender-critical anti-trans movement, have tried to weaponise legislation, I'm going to do it back. And I'm just one person.
And you won't. I mean, as you've mentioned, there will be other people in your position, both medically and politically, I think. But I need to make the point, and I don't think this is relevant to you, but you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that the stories that have reached the news most recently involve female nurses uncomfortable with having to share changing rooms with male colleagues who identify as women, or male prisoners who suddenly discovered a transgender identity on their way from the courtroom to the prison cell. These are also real problems.
But the changes in the Supreme Court ruling were brought about by For Women Scotland challenging the ruling about
self-ID
boards. No, it was about, so the point that they were able to hone down on was about a transgender woman sitting on an all women board.
Yes.
And so that was the point that the Supreme Court down on, that you had to, in order to be on an all women board, you had to be biologically female, and that was the catalyst that they needed to do all of this. To
move into all of the other areas as well. I'm going to take guidance from other callers, actually, because I'm late for the news, because I thought it was found that it had been unlawful to admit people to single-sex services on the basis of self-identification, but it would not be unlawful for somebody to... So it was the service that was acting unlawfully rather than the person. Because you said it wasn't the law, you said it was guidance. Some of it is legal.
So this current guidance that come out today is guidance.
As a consequence, you're right. Sorry, as a consequence of the legal findings, the guidance is that you need to provide these spaces, but at the same time as issuing the guidance, Baroness Faulkner is acknowledging that they will, or the law, in fact, will remain unenforced by the equalities regulator because its meagre funding means it cannot take up the fight on behalf of women. Any mistakes are always likely to be corrected by other callers, but I think I'm clear on what you've said, and I mean the most important thing to take away from what you've told us is sympathy. I'm so sorry for what you are put through by other people, whether they're acting in good faith or from a place of genuine concern or not. It doesn't matter, because the way it reaches you is absolutely hideous, and I fear inevitable. And as under Lil's account, almost entirely attributable to the political noise that has been thrown up around this issue. 11:32 is the time. Dominic Ellis has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:35 is the time, and I don't think that this is mischievous. I don't think there's any room for mischief in this conversation. I'll leave that to the people who just shout, "Can a woman have a penis?" at politicians. But if you were a male pervert who wanted to gain access to female facilities, what is to stop you saying that you're actually a transgender man? As opposed to going to the trouble of dressing up like a woman and making you are a fully functioning biological male, and you walk into the ladies' toilets, and the kind of people that have accosted Lil, our last caller, in public, would immediately and vociferously object, to which you just respond by saying, "No, I'm a trans man." Who's going to check? Jacqueline is in Ramsgate. Jacqueline, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. My husband's a big fan of yours.
Your husband? Your husband?
I don't listen. He always tells me about your show, but I'm just like, and he said, "Jacqueline, you must ring," so I'm ringing.
All right. What's your husband's name?
Nick.
Hello, Nick. Why? Yeah, I mean, you should really be spreading the love. You should be tuning in, Jacqueline, but we'll save that conversation.
Well, maybe listening to you. I think you complicated everything, and
go on.
My views might be way too simple, okay?
Yes.
I'm sure they will be, however, because people like to debate, and I get very frustrated. I don't understand why this is a debate. I have a trans daughter.
Yes.
My husband and I, we have raised 8 children at home. Our 8 children are all in the house. They stand outside the toilet door, outside the bathroom. We all navigate, as all people do, family living.
Yes.
Bathrooms in many places now are just separate cubicles. That makes life a lot easier. It's a toilet you go into that is just separate. Recently, in the work I do, I community work, I had a conversation with somebody who said, "I'm so frustrated still with shops. They cause us a lot of problems." I said, "All right, what's that then?" She said, "My grandson wanted to get a doll, but the doll aisle is all pink." And his father said, "You can't go down there. That's for girls. This is where you have to go." Yeah. Why is that still? Why do we still do that? Because
well, you were accusing me of complicating. You said it was me complicating things. You're the one that's complicating things.
There's no sexual orientation associated with toys. They're just toys. Toilets.
No, I know all this. I do know this, and I agree with you. And
we should be at a place in society in the 21st century where we're just accepting and kind.
I agree with almost all of that. Well, I actually agree with all of it. But the point at which it becomes problematic, you've got great taste in radio presenters, your husband, is the point at which your daughter grows up to want
My daughter is grown up.
Oh, okay. And the goes to work, for example, in a hospital, and some of the biological female colleagues object to a biological male being in there.
You see, you spoke about that, and when I was at school, we were made to get changed in changing rooms, and now you have changing robes that you can wear over you. If I was placed in any situation where I still now had to change in a group environment, I would go somewhere else to do it. I wouldn't want to change with a group of other women. I would take myself
but you wouldn't. What if a trans woman who is biologically male revels in public displays of you know,
this is when we're really
nudity.
difficult, because these are just people. Rather than say trans, we have people who revel in.
No, I'm not. No, because I'm talking about a human being with a penis in the female changing area who is not like you, modest in their changing. These are really valid questions.
These are really real issues, and I look at my youngest,
so it is complicated.
who is living in this world. I said, I see it too simply.
Well, no, not too simply. I'm just pointing out things to you.
My youngest lives in this awful world where, like your first caller, heartbreaking, and my prayers, Lil will be on my prayer tree.
Good.
Heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking.
Yes.
Our youngest is trans, so we are navigating this world that maybe we did or didn't expect to navigate. It's never been a problem for us, ever. But
and now it is.
Limits and impacts on her mental health. Now, mental health is hard enough anyway, without then being trans and having mental health. A lot of trans people come from a real deep place of mental health. And our mental health. I've also lost, just so you know, our first son, our eldest boy, we lost to suicide.
I'm sorry.
So we come from a place of navigating, oh my goodness, we've lost one child here.
We don't want to lose
And we have
another.
our youngest on a journey into adulthood, where the world is just so challenging and unaccepting. You just think, why can we not just be a world where we say, we'll work it out and make the adaptations around it? Let's have separate cubicles. Let's have cubicles where you go in to change so you're not all together in one room. We should have reached that a long time ago.
I think I agree with you. I mean, pragmatism and practicality coming up hard against principles that are somehow hard. So I do need to finish. Hang on. No.
You need to finish. Go on then.
I need to ask you the final question, which is what do you think is going to happen as a consequence of this guidance being essentially published with a simultaneous admission that it's entirely unenforceable?
One, you can't enforce it, like you said. If you check people, that's assault. I would hope that maybe a different strand would come off it and people will start saying, actually, the world needs to adjust. Our toilets need to be separate cubicles.
It might move the needle
and
the other way.
we need to have just toilets that have cubicles.
Yeah,
and we need to have changing rooms that have...
Back to me in the top shop changing room 10 years ago. Thank you. You're not oversimplifying. No, bless you, Jacqueline, and bless Nick. But before you go, I have to ask you, do you think you're up to a question about another very, very difficult issue?
What's that?
Why the hell is the Ramsgate Holiday Inn 5 miles outside Ramsgate?
I work outside Ramsgate at Minster in Ramsgate.
Oh, yes.
It's classed as Minster, and I have to drive out to work to the conservatory, I call it.
But I got to the station. I got to the station, and I thought to myself, I'll go for a lovely walk to the Holiday Inn Ramsgate, which it was called.
and it was in Minster.
Yeah,
it was at the top of the hill.
Well, it's on a roundabout next to a McDonald's and a service station.
But next time you're there, pop down to the Minster Little Charity Shop, and I'm often hiding in there supporting my team.
I might well do that. I had a lovely time in Ramsgate and in Margate. You've never come across a taxi driver called Ozzy by any chance, have you?
I haven't, no.
I just got the impression he knew everybody in Ramsgate.
I imagine he does,
But clearly not you. Thank you. And thank you for your contribution. And it's pretty close to where I am, I've got to be honest with you. But I'm a man. So I don't feel that I can quite completely call for what Jacqueline can call for, because it won't really affect me. And of course that other issue, a lot of people seem very reluctant to address it. If it is the sort of pervy contingent that we are building our legislation around, and we're going to treat all trans women as if they are men pretending to be trans women in order to indulge their own perversions, then why would they bother pretending to be women when they can just march into the female-only areas and insist that they're trans men? The question has always been for me, who is going to check and how? And, of course, you can dress it up however you prefer, but that's what essentially is being said this morning by Baroness Faulkner, the outgoing head of the Human Rights Commission. The equalities regulator will not be able to enforce this. And, there's a little... You'll indulge me for a moment, because some of the nonsense I've endured on this when I was still on Twitter was off the flipping charts. But you'll allow me just for a moment to go, hello, I told you. And there are elements that are different. Prisons, for example, of course, but at the entry level, at the level at which it is going to affect most people, whether they are trans women or trans men, or whether they are gender non-conforming women, or whether they are women with medical conditions that make them look like society's idea of what a man looks like. I'm getting quite a lot of messages like that, which Lil has obviously inspired. I'm also getting an awful lot of love for you, Lil, if you're still listening. But Sarah puts it best. I have PCOS as well, James, and endometriosis. I can grow a full beard in 3 days, and I'm a cis woman. What now? What now, indeed? What has been achieved here, and how is it going to be enforced? Enforced is such an ugly word as well, isn't it? And it means you've got women like Lil, and presumably like Sarah, and many others, going about their peaceful, lawful business, running the constant risk of being both abused, accosted and accused in public. And it wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. It just wouldn't have happened 10 years ago, would it? One day maybe we'll just try to unpick the question of why it's happening now. Why it's happening now. While I'm on the full... go me tip. The Trump was the other thing. If you looked at Donald Trump's endorsement of anti-trans and didn't think that it was going to be used by him as a gateway for the abuse of and discrimination of other minorities, then I understand, because your feelings were so deeply held and so powerful that you couldn't see what was obvious to anybody with an understanding of fascism. You just find one minority that it is permissible to attack, and the fascists will bite your arm off. Spoiler alert, they did.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:48. Two extremes for you here in the texts that I shall share with you shortly. But honestly, if you think this is a straightforward question, then I've got a lovely bridge that you might like to buy. A little bit of fun before we return to the phones. Richard Tice has been at it again. Fresh from the announcement that he is being investigated by the parliamentary authorities, he has decided to start lecturing a so-called expert on a subject that he obviously knows more about than they do. I wonder if you can guess what Richard Tice has been doing this week. Has he been lecturing Jamie Oliver on healthy eating? Or has he been lecturing the Archbishop of Canterbury on Christianity? Or finally, has the king of the Nepo babies, Richard Tice, been lecturing David Attenborough on climate change? And I actually want you to vote on this, because I'm tempted to add number 4, which would be all three. So, number 1, Richard Tice has been lecturing Jamie Oliver on healthy eating. Number 2, Richard Tice has been lecturing the Archbishop of Canterbury on Christianity. Or number 3, Richard Tice has been lecturing David Attenborough on climate change. Could you text 1, 2 or 3, or the words, Jamie Oliver, David Attenborough or the Archbishop of Canterbury to 84850. I'm not doing all 3 of the above, but they're equally feasible, which is why this is, for once, quite a good multiple choice quiz. All that we need to happen now is that I remember to provide you with the answer. So what is it? Is it number 1, Richard Tice lecturing Jamie Oliver on healthy eating? Number 2, Richard Tice lecturing the Archbishop of Canterbury on Christianity? Or number 3, Richard Tice lecturing David Attenborough on climate change? 10 to 12 is the time. Back to this question of how on earth they are going to implement or enforce, whatever word you prefer, guidance on single-sex spaces. Vix is in Norwich. Vix, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. It's a pleasure to speak to you again after your book tour in Norwich a few years ago.
Oh, lovely.
I'm non-binary transmasculine, and this means that I don't conform to either male or female, but at the moment I am taking testosterone because I'm exploring kind of a more masculine area of myself, but I do tend to be fluid. I just wanted to put that into context. So when we're talking about the fetish thing in the bathrooms, the sort of pervy thing in the bathrooms, I think a huge problem with this conversation, like not this, but like around the whole world, has been about if you have a penis, you're essentially liable to attack someone, and that just doesn't make any sense. It truly doesn't. And I speak from somebody who's grown up in a background of domestic violence and sexual violence.
Gosh.
I know what it's like. I know what it's like. I've been to crisis centres, and this is all. There's not the evidence for this guidance to come into play, really. It's a handful of cases, and like an absolute minute handful. And considering the hatred against trans people, you'd think if it was that bad, we'd be hearing about it every other day. There was a study done by the UCLA Williams Institute School of Law in February 2025, and they came to the conclusion that, and I quote, "There is no evidence that allowing transgender people access to bathrooms aligning with their gender identity jeopardizes safety and privacy."
There's always just for my peace of mind, there's a slight danger when you cite stuff I haven't got in front of me, and I need to acknowledge that somebody else might be able to cite something that sounds equally august academically that would challenge what you've said. And also, I suppose I would say, if I were the kind of woman that challenged Lil in Newcastle Central Station, I'd say, no, I'm not worried about trans women. I'm worried about men pretending to be trans women, because they will cause harm inside. Do you see what I mean? I'm just pointing out the nuance in what you're telling me.
I absolutely understand, but I think, as you said before, just before this call, it's much easier to walk into a bathroom now and just say you're a trans man. Why would you bother putting a wig on and makeup and clothes, and also knowing the amount of eyes that are on trans women already at the moment? Why would you do that? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, it doesn't make any sense to me, and yet sometimes you look at the massed ranks of people on the other side of the argument, and you think, well, I must be the one that's missing something. It can't be that straightforward. It can't just boil down to, I'm terribly sorry that you feel that way, but implementing what you want is impossible, because we'd have to check the underpants of everybody coming into a facility. Or number two, if I really was desperate to get into the ladies as a man, I wouldn't dress up as a woman. I'd just march in and say that I'm a trans man. So for people listening, I know what you mean by what you said, but you were born a biological female. This is the perspective that you're bringing to the conversation. I don't know if some people might think that's important. I guess I do, because I don't think as a cis man, I don't think I can tell cis women that they have to do this, that or the other. And that's the real problem here, is that at some point there might have to be some sort of referendum.
I mean,
God forbid, Vix. Enough.
Yeah,
flipping God save us from referendum.
I know, please, not the 52-48.
Yeah, well, what if it was?
The thing is like, particularly, I'm a human being.
Yeah,
I don't feel like I'm in debate. I'm a human being, and I just go in, I use the loo, and I leave.
Do you ever get any trouble? So you go into, which loo do you use, if you don't mind me asking? In some ways, it's none of my business, but you did ring a phone in about this, so... Of
course, no, absolutely fine. I'm willing to say it's fine. So currently I use the female bathrooms, but I have been taking testosterone for the first time this year.
Right.
And I also have PMOS, as Lil has said, so I really feel for Lil, because I had this fear before I even started taking testosterone.
Right.
Like, increasingly I'm going to appear more male, and when I've had top surgery, I'm not quite sure what to do. There is actually a really forgotten part of the code, and I will cite the number so you can look it up, but it's 13.146. It reads, a trans man might be excluded from the women-only service if the service provider decides that because he presents as a man, other service users could reasonably object to his presence and exclude him as a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. So, in other words, if trans men look too masculine for the ladies, it's entirely possible that I will just have to stand outside and wet myself. Which is incredibly, dignified.
Yeah, I mean, it is. The more that you talk about the practicalities, the more we talk about the practicalities, the more that the principles, however passionately or sincerely held they may be, are rendered let's say unworkable rather than ridiculous.
Yes. I agree. The one concern I have with your specific question about what's going to happen, either nothing, potentially, like you said. And I had an experience recently where I didn't quite have the trans-affirming swimwear I wanted, but I really wanted to go to a local aquafit swimming class, and I was really nervous because I had chest hair, a beard, deep voice. Everyone was lovely, and I was really worried, and everyone was just so nice. And I think it's sometimes that nasty people and obviously bots on the internet
There's lots of that,
makes things a lot worse. However, it could also lead to increased vigilantism, as Lil has explained and experienced. There are people in my life who've had experience of this. I'm getting fearful that I will experience it. And again, I understand that you'll need to check this. But there was, and I explained this to your producer, but there was a tweet from an X post, whatever, last year, about late June 2025, where J.K. Rowling was asked about this exact question: how are you going to plan to police public toilets? And her response was that quite easily, really, decent men will stay out, as they always have, so we can all assume who aren't a threat, given their disregard for women and girls' safety, privacy and dignity. Photographing, reporting and disseminating such men's images online will be a piece of cake. And I think calling for photographing people in bathrooms is so ironic to suggest sexual violence to combat supposed sexual violence of which there is no evidence.
Well, there is,
and that really concerns me.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that intervention from J.K. Rowling, but obviously she is one of the very biggest names in this in this space, and I know that Eleanor has checked, and I think in that exchange she cited examples of people who perhaps had tried to get into. Am I reading this correctly? Ladies' toilets in order to do bad things. Men who wouldn't pretend to be transgender to get into women's spaces and harm women and girls. But you are calling upon people to do it themselves, and Lil would be the victim of that. Unless she's meaning simply that all trans women should just stop pretending that they're trans women, and therefore nobody would go into the ladies who...
What defines a woman? My mum's had a full hysterectomy. Does that mean she's not a woman anymore? People have mastectomies. People who can grow facial hair, like myself and Lil.
You talk about having your top done. Some people have their bottoms done, and do they then cease to be biologically what they were born, and do they get? And so it is. I mean,
And intersex people are really forgotten in this conversation, and they supposedly make up the same population as redheads. But people don't necessarily know because it's not checked for unless it's sincerely
necessary. And it never
necessary.
was until relatively recently, when it has become a huge issue and is going to stay that way for the time being. Thank you, Vix, and good luck as well. I mean, I don't want anybody to endure what Lil described, but I can tell from my inbox that lots of people are. Just in terms of Idiot's Corner, you must see the ridiculousness of that statement, right? This person, the idea that it's difficult to check. Have you ever heard of fines? If you're caught with a penis in a woman's private space, it's a £1,000 fine. It's actually pretty simple, James, just like you. I mean, here's the sentence. Who is going to check? It's 5 words. Who is going to check? I mean, it's possible that that's too complicated a question for you to process, but who is going to check? And therein lies the problem, and indeed the reason why it's not straightforward or simple at all. Or rather, perhaps it is straightforward and simple, but not in the way that many people would prefer to believe. Who is going to check? And you now have, unless I've read it wrong, and it's not impossible that I've read it wrong, you now have the head of the Human Rights Commission, who oversaw the drafting of the guidance, the EHRC guidance on single-sex spaces, saying nothing we can do to enforce what we've discovered, which is what some of us were saying all along, albeit perhaps we should have said it a bit more loudly. Maybe. Probably. Sorry. It's 12 noon.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 4 minutes after 12. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. What have you taken away? What day is it? Wednesday? 12 noon on a Wednesday. So normally we do PMQs at this point, but they're all on holiday. The MPs, they're all on recess. So what's that? 8 hours of show that we've done so far this week. It's almost Thursday, Friday. It's almost half time, isn't it? It's just after. Is it just after half time? 2.5. So 11:30 on a Wednesday is half time in our week. What's your biggest takeaway from the first half of the JOB experience this week? What's the thing that you perhaps have thought about the most? The thing that you've gone back to, found yourself? I'm getting increasingly obsessed with the screen stuff. Not the conversation we've always had about the algorithms and the dangers of what we're witnessing, but the actual physical addiction to just checking your phone. We talked about it yesterday at some length, and it was fascinating. And the thing that interests me most, as you will know if you were listening yesterday, is what we're losing as a consequence. So if you think of the human condition as a space, you think of it as a physical entity, your existence is a pie. If you've just tuned in, stay with me on this, all right? So your existence is a pie. Let's say your attention span is a pie. The things that you give attention to. It's bigger than that. It's your existence. Your personality. Think of a pie. Are you thinking of a pie? What sort of pie are you thinking of? A cherry pie. Okay, got cherry apple. I was thinking about a steak and kidney pie. But there we go. And all of the attention that we pay to our phones, to our screens, right, as we discussed yesterday, you're taking a little piece of pie away. You're taking and you're not replacing it with, you're taking so what are we losing by putting, the pie isn't working, is it, as an analogy? It's a shame that, because I really like pie. What are we losing by doing that thing? And it's not just the things that we could be doing instead, to use that great line from the old children's television programme, Why Don't You?, which is very niche. That's a very specific, generationally targeted little nostalgic memory for you. You are obviously losing your time. Of course you are. But what other things would you be doing in that time? That's almost a more spiritual question, isn't it? Or certainly a more nebulous question. So what am I doing? I'm wasting time. I got caught last night, actually, having told you that I never do. I got caught last night. Oh, I tell you what I really like. It's James Acaster's fault. I saw James Acaster live at the Royal Festival Hall on Sunday. He is possibly the funniest man alive. He's certainly up there. And all four of us went. So, the full range of age and interests. But my goodness me, we were howling. And he just, as a throwaway line, he talked about setting off to do something responsible and nourishing, and ending up watching loads of little clips of people who can speak a foreign language that they don't look like they should be able to speak. Do you know, it's usually Chinese, so it's usually someone who looks like me, like a very sort of Celtic or Anglo-Saxon looking person who just sort of slides into a Chinese restaurant. And I think the funniest ones are the ones that are actually in China probably, or in Hong Kong, but it's pretty funny when they do it here. And the staff in the Chinese restaurant are chatting away in Chinese or Mandarin, and he just joins in, or he waits until they come to the table and he just orders his dinner in absolutely fluent Mandarin, and the reactions are just... So I have a little bit of Greek, right? A tiny little bit of Greek. And Greek is not a language that, or certainly 30 years ago when I started trying to learn it, not many Greeks expected someone who looks like me to speak half decent conversational Greek. But the reactions I got, compared to the reactions you'll get from Chinese people when you just start chatting, and absolutely fluent. That's the point. It's not tourist or conversational Mandarin. They go in on it. And I got stuck in that last night. I probably spent 20 minutes watching that when before I realised that I was actually doing the thing that I'd spent much of yesterday's show telling you I never do. I don't get caught on stuff like that. I waste my time doing things that are not necessarily a waste of time, like playing word games. So what are we doing instead? And I mean the checking of it. I don't even mean what you do when you've checked. Because, yeah, you're checking the news. You're a radio presenter. You're keeping up to date with current affairs. But you don't need to check it every 30 seconds. You don't need to break off from reading a book to check it. So I'm fascinated by what we lost, what we are losing, which is why this story in the Times today really, really got to me. I'm going to read it to you because it's rather well written by their consumer affairs correspondent. I'm going to read you a couple of paragraphs. A cardboard box could once become a castle, a racing car or a spacecraft. A patch of wasteland was a jungle, the space beneath the dining room table, a secret headquarters. Isn't that lovely? And I wonder what the cut-off point is, age-wise. So you're either nodding along to that and remembering the time that you did what? I'll tell you what I used to do. I had bunk beds, and I used to tuck the duvet on the top bunk in between the mattress and the bed frame so that you could pull it down, so you turn the bottom bunk into a den, like a really cool self-contained den. And that would then be a spaceship or an army lorry with all the soldiers on, but it was because it was somehow cooler to pull it down and have it closed off. And the story sadly goes on. Today, however, confronted by the empty hours of the summer holidays, children are more likely to ask for a screen than use their imagination. Just 1 in 10 children considers going outside to be the first thing to do when they're bored. And how many parents say, you see, the thing is, as we touched on yesterday, you can't. You're spending at least as much time on your screen. You're spending more time on your screen than your kids are spending on theirs. So you can't sit there and say, well, why don't you go outside and do something less boring instead? Why don't you go and build a den? Why don't you go and do this, do that, do the other? 1 in 10 considers going outside to be the first thing to do when bored. So they don't invent games anymore. They don't build imaginary worlds. They just reach for the phone, the tablet or the television. Children are now more than twice as likely to reach for a screen as they are to make up a story or a pretend game. Just 28% saying they'd ask for a device or use a device when boredom struck. 12% would respond by inventing something to play. This is what I was trying to articulate yesterday when I talked about the summer holidays stretching out in front of you. And if somebody had said to you when you were 10, when you grow up, you'll never be bored, you'd have thought that sounded like the best imaginable future, wouldn't you? You'd have thought, wow, imagine never being bored. And now here we are. We're never bored. We're watching some bloke from Manchester speak fluent Mandarin to a Chinese waiter, and we've wasted half an hour of our life. So it's fed us in some way. It's made us laugh. It's made us smile. I'll tell you what else I used to love, the ones where parents have come back from military service and they surprise their children in the schools. These are lovely moving things, but they're like fast food. Instead of a 3-course meal, it's like you're not eating really healthy, nourishing food that makes you a better person, makes you healthier. You're just tickling some of your sensory nodes, getting a kick out of it, getting a little shiver down the spine, shedding a sort of shallow tear, being moved, but you're not doing it in the way that you should do it. I mean, part of me wants to ask you what happens when you tell the kids to play outside. But the other part of me wants to ask you a slightly surprising question. Are we sure that they are losing something valuable? I got a horrible feeling that I set too much store by something someone told me some years ago. It was the first producer of this programme, actually. And he had this theory that I loved so much I stole it. And he used to point out that when somebody rang in to say, oh, kids these days, they don't go out and play soldiers anymore. They're all sat in front of their screens playing. I mean, when I started this show, they were probably on Game Boys or Sega Mega Drives. But the point stands. And the producer would say, he'd say, well, what would you rather do? You know, you can play Crazy Taxi on the Sega Mega Drive, which is a game as good as the ones that you've got to put £1 in a machine for in an arcade, or you can go outside and sit in a box and pretend it's a car. I mean, it's not exactly mysterious why the younger generation are choosing to engage with technology in a way that the older generation didn't, for the very simple reason that the older generation didn't have the technology. Soldiers, what are you going to do? Pick up a stick and pretend it's a gun and run around the park, or nick your dad's copy of Call of Duty and get immersed for 8 hours in a full-on, incredibly detailed military operation? But what have you lost as a consequence of that? What have you lost? What have you actually lost? And what might the long-term ramifications of this be? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. What are we losing? Do you know what else I was going to do? But I really I think I have to be strict on this. So it's not about blanket forts or racing cars. I mean, what did you build? What was the biggest, most sophisticated thing that you built as a child? With parental help, possibly. But it has to be something mad, right? It can't just be a den. Unless it was an underground den with 14 different chambers and linking tunnels and stuff like that. It has to be something off the charts, borderline social services territory. My dad told me one day we would turn Grandad's old lawnmower into a go-kart. Looking back, from the perspective of adulthood and indeed parenthood, my dad was not being completely straight with me when he promised me that one day, when he'd got enough time off work, we would turn my Grandad's old petrol Atco lawnmower into a go-kart, because it had a petrol engine, so I presumed you'd be able to hook the engine. 3 problems with that. Number 1, obvious safety issues. Given number 2, my father had precisely no qualifications or expertise in that field. And number 3, we wouldn't start with a go-kart, turning a lawnmower into a go-kart, when we hadn't even managed to change the mudguards on my bicycle without the wheel falling off. So I realised looking back that was never going to happen. But imagine if it had. Imagine if we turned my Grandad's old lawnmower into an actual go-kart. I'd probably now be a Formula 1 driver if we'd done that. I wouldn't be sitting here boring you rigid every day between 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. So I am interested in where your imagination took you as a child, but I don't want my switchboard to fill up with people sharing stories like my one about the bunk beds, because they're all the same story in a way. I mean, did you do something extraordinary with your imagination when you were a child? But what I really want from you is what we've lost and whether we can get it back. Here's another thing. Why don't you let your children play outdoors? Because how many parents are thinking, yeah, he's right. Yeah, if you tell me you're bored, I'm going to say, good. Yvonne's been in touch. She says to the grandchildren, good, I'm glad you're bored, because now you can think of something to do. But we don't let them play outdoors anymore. And if they are playing outdoors, we spend our lives on tenterhooks. There's a lovely story from Leeds today, and I've got family members who are heavily involved in this kind of thing, creating street play, actually getting all the residents of a street to move the cars, go and park somewhere else, temporarily close the street entirely to traffic, turn it into a play street where the kids can ride scooters and play football and kick cans at, well, not even cans, it's organised play, supervised play, ramps in the middle of the road, children drawing with chalk on the pavement, blowing bubbles, kicking a football where the cars would normally be. I love that. But you wouldn't necessarily let your kids do it if there weren't any adults present in the way that you did when we were kids. I'm not turning into one of those Facebook posts about spangles and drinking water from hose pipes. But you'd knock on your mate's door. You'd probably have your bicycle propped up against his gate. You'd ask his mum if he was coming out to play. He'd come tearing down the stairs at 100 miles an hour. He'd go and get his grifter. You'd rev up your chopper, and then you'd be off. For the rest of the day. You might play a full 5-day test match in your back garden, or you might go gallivanting without your parents having the first idea where you were until it was time for tea, at which point you'd come home. And that's when you deploy your imagination. So Just knit all of this together for me, if you can. A cardboard box could once become a castle. A racing car or a spacecraft. Statistics, slightly chilling, to be honest with you, about how children just don't do this anymore. They don't make up their own games. They don't build imaginary universes. They don't dream of mum coming back from the supermarket with all the shopping in a cardboard box, because you can turn a cardboard box into something fun. It doesn't happen anymore. Why? Not why doesn't it happen? How can we be sure that this is bad? For the reasons that I relayed a moment ago about playing creative. Video games are brilliant, right? Absolutely brilliant. And you can have, in some of these games, you're not building your own imaginary universe, but you're exploring an almost infinite and magical imaginary universe. It's just that someone else imagined it, not you. Why is playing Baldur's Gate any different from reading Lord of the Rings? Are we sure that these children who don't play outside anymore and don't build imaginary games and turn their bunk beds into tanks, are we sure they're losing something? Or is the technology different, but neither better nor worse? Because I don't want to turn into one of those Facebook posts about spangles and drinking water out of hose pipes. What are we sure they're losing something, these kids who have different upbringings from ours? Are we sure they're losing something? And if so, what is it? 0345 6060 973. And how do you know that they're losing something valuable? Prove it to me. It's 12:20.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 12, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So there's two things I've not got quite right this week. I didn't get the phone in about the Nazi right, but that's not going anywhere, that story. Kemi Badenoch has tripled down on it. And you know what happens if I feel I've not got a phone in quite right? I don't think, well, we'll never do that again. I inevitably and always think, right, we're coming back to that until we do jolly well get it right. Come on, team, on your uppers. And yesterday, this conversation about what we're losing by spending our time, not what we're doing on the phone, but constantly checking it. And maybe it's too obvious. Maybe we are losing the ability to imagine things. But I just want today to look instead at the question of whether we are sure that what we're losing is about... What? Here you go. I got there in the end. It's only 22 minutes after 12. The second hour that I've been addressing this subject, albeit from slightly different angles. Why is it good to be bored? And what do you think our children, who are growing up in a world where they're never bored, are going to suffer as a consequence of never being bored? Why is it good to be bored? 0345 6060 973. You won't find a 10-year-old in the world who thinks that being bored is good. And yet we all sit here now, stroking our chins, nostalgically reminiscing about how important it is to be bored. Why is it good to be bored? And what might children growing up, not knowing what it is to be bored, end up like, or losing, or missing? And you can't really miss what you have never known. Nick's in Rochester. Nick, what do you reckon?
So, hi James,
Hello,
good
mate.
speaking to you. Hello. So, I think there's a balance to be struck here. So, I've got 3 kids, so summer holidays can be a bit of a nightmare. And I think there's a real balance to be drawn between the kids being bored and telling them to go outside and letting them play video games. I think one of your producers I was just speaking to, I was saying, my little boy, he'll be playing a video game of something. So he'll play Minecraft or one of those. Then he'll have his little mates come over. They'll go outside or go to his bedroom and they'll play out Minecraft.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, this is kind of what I meant, actually. It's not a zero-sum game, is it? 100% bad versus 100% good.
No. But I think it's just a compromise. And it's got to be... Look, we've seen the complete opposite. So if my wife and I have a lazy day and just go, kids, go on the screens, you can see the impact that has, because it is feeding a lot of stimulus.
So when they go off to play Minecraft as humans without any screen interaction, is that because you've turned off the console? Is that because you've made them do it?
Absolutely, but we have those conversations with them to say, we're going to turn it off now because you're going out, your friends are coming over, you're going to play, so no screens for this time. And they understand that. So
do they?
Again,
and do all their friends understand it as well? Or do some of them go, God, your dad's a right old git, isn't he? Because we can play endlessly on Minecraft when we're around at my house.
See, we're in a very fortunate position, I think, with the people that we have in our lives like that. So
cool.
We have those conversations with the other parents, and they're all along very much the same lines around just, limiting the time. But again, we're in a very privileged situation. Just to another point that you said, because we live in a rural village, we actually do still have kids that come and knock on the door and go, oh, is your child available? Can they come and play? And they do go off on their bicycles and they do go around the village.
So amazingly, the little village you live in is called 1978.
Exactly.
That's absolutely delightful. What then? Yeah. So to knit all of that together, and it's interesting that you mentioned you can. I mean, the shift in their attitude and behaviour is palpable when they've been plugged into the screens for too long. In big picture territory, if they were plugged into their screens all the time, if you didn't have this, privilege is a great word to use. I don't know that it needs to be used here. Just lucky. Luck is a privilege, I suppose. What would they lose? What would the children growing up not doing? The imagination based. How would they grow up differently from the children who do?
I think it's more a case of just from the imagination point of view. I think it's more just the overstimulation.
Are they ever bored, your kids?
100%.
When?
100%. When we tell them to go to bed, mostly, that's when they're the most bored and need drinks.
Yeah, that doesn't really count. I'm thinking about literally waking up at 9 o'clock in the morning and thinking I've got nothing to do until bedtime. There's nothing on the telly. I'm going to have to turn that cardboard box into a spaceship.
Again, the cardboard box, I do love a cardboard box. So I'd like to say that they only really get bored when they're tired and they can't think of anything to do, and that's when they need a little bit of direction.
That's different. I hear you, and you're right. You're clearly, if we were going to be plotting a graph, you're quite high up it when it comes to the kids having a nice mix of both technology and imagination-based play. And there'll be some kids, especially if you go back in time, who are 100% imagination, and these days there'll be some kids who are 100% technology. And Nick touches on the thing that's measurable. You can see that the child is hyper, or the child is frantic, or the child has lost the ability to relax. The child may even be anxious as a consequence of having constant stimulation. So what's the difference between... I have to choose my words slightly carefully here. What's the difference between... I can't say if it's self-stimulation. What's the difference between that technological stimulation and the stimulation you have when you are building a spaceship out of a cardboard box? This is what I'm trying to pin down, because the level of engagement is huge. When you were playing games of imagination, you could see the stars, right, outside the window of your spaceship when you were little. You could hear when you were pretending to be Bjorn Borg or John McEnroe and you were at Wimbledon, you could smell the grass and hear the umpire calling out the scores, even if you were playing against the garage wall. There's something there that you don't get, even if you're playing the most realistic and convincing tennis simulation in the history of video games. There's something that you are not feeding, but I can't put into words exactly what it is, and I can't explain to you without any room for quibbling or beyond reasonable doubt that it's better or worse now than it was then. Hey, if you had found me when I was playing tennis against my garage wall, or even the summer I jumped off the garage roof holding a patio umbrella thinking that I would float gently to the ground, that was pretty traumatic for my mum, I think, actually. It's a miracle I've got any of my tongue left. But those things that you would do as a child, born of boredom. No one has ever jumped off their garage roof holding a patio umbrella in the hope of floating gently to the ground unless they were quite spectacularly bored, almost certainly in the middle of a summer holiday in the late 70s, early 80s, because you didn't have patio umbrellas anywhere except in pubs before then. And I don't know that I can win an argument or win a debate by saying that was really valuable. Why? What was it that was so valuable about being bored? 0345 6060 973. And I wonder if anybody wants to have a crack at telling me why you don't let your children play outside these days, because statistically they're no more at risk or in any more potential danger than we were when we were disappearing for hours on end and only coming out when Mum leant out the kitchen window and rang a big old handbell. It's 12:30. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:32 is the time, and this is actually hilarious. Or well, I think it is. So I gave you a choice of 3 people who Richard Tice, the Nepo King, had taken upon himself to lecture about their own field of expertise. And I gave you 3 choices. I said, has Richard Tice been lecturing Jamie Oliver on healthy eating? Or, option 2, has Richard Tice been lecturing the Archbishop of Canterbury on Christianity? And then option 3, has Richard Tice been lecturing David Attenborough on climate change? And if it was Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, if it was Ask the Audience, you know, when they do, when they go sort of up and down, and then one of them goes right up there, and then the worst thing that can happen if you're a contestant on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is that all 4 answers are more or less equal, or if you've already eliminated 1 or 2, you know what I'm talking about. That's what we've got. We've got equal graphs, with the David Attenborough ever so slightly ahead of Jamie Oliver, and in 3rd place Richard Tice has been lecturing the Archbishop of Canterbury on Christianity, which is actually the correct answer. So the Archbishop of Canterbury, while visiting Ghana and Cameroon and paying a clearly very emotional visit to Cape Coast Castle, which had been used to imprison enslaved people by the British in the 17th century, reflected upon what she was witnessing and the horrific conditions that thousands of people would have been kept in. She wrote, "It is impossible not to feel the weight of the immense evil that drove the transatlantic slave trade." That's pretty much all she said, adding, "I pray, not only in lament for the church's involvement in the slave trade." And Richard Tice took it upon himself to respond, to say, "Did you thank Jesus for giving great courage and vision to the British for abolishing the slave trade, spending vast amounts of money and sacrificing brave Royal Naval sailors in the process? As a Christian, you don't speak for me, nor millions of other Christians in the UK." I mean, in many ways, he'd have been better off having a crack at Jamie Oliver for having healthy eating all wrong, or telling David Attenborough that he doesn't really understand the environment or ecology or science or whatever it may be. Just trying to sort of imagine the mindset of a man who sees a tweet about the slave trade and sees the leader of the Church of England just lamenting the horrors that were inflicted upon humans by humans, and thinking, well, I'm not going to let that stand. I'm going to make some point about Jesus and sailors. And anyway, the sooner there's a leadership battle at Reform UK, the better for satirists up and down the country, because Richard Tice, no doubt, will be throwing his hat back into the ring. 12:35 is the time. And congratulations to everybody who got it right, but I'm afraid that the correct answer came last, which is the sign of a perfect multiple choice test, isn't it? If the correct answer is the last answer, that means it was a brilliantly constructed multiple choice test. We spent some time coming up with the wrong answers on that one. Let's get back to what it is that you lose when you are not playing as children with each other, or indeed with inanimate objects that aren't even toys. What do you lose? Paul's in Corby. Paul, what have you got?
Hi, yeah, so my point is a great point.
Is it? That's not for you to say, Paul, that's for me. So you can't, you like me, you can't ring in and say that your own point is brilliant before you've even made it.
No, I mean, the subject is brilliant. Right?
I know you do, I'm teasing. Go on.
I come from 1969, I'm 57. Right. I'm well in the sort of bracket of the hose piping, drinking, sort of outdoor playing, bike owning youngster. And I have two children now, a bit older, 19 and 25, but at the time that I made the decision that I did to let them start gaming, I was in the army for 25 years, so outward bound, I bought them golf clubs and boats and climbing gear. We spent so much time trying to get them to do what I wanted them to do and go out playing and all that sort of stuff when they didn't want to do it.
Just not interested. Even ex-army, even you can't inspire a little bit of outdoor spirit in the boys.
Well, we got a bit done, but it wasn't anywhere near as successful as I'd like to have been.
Right? I want to go home. Are we nearly there yet? Can we go home now, Dad? Have we had enough? Can we stop at McDonald's on the way home, Dad, please?
There you go. So I went to a computer expose, so it was an exhibition.
Yeah.
And while we were there was a group of 3,000 people sat in a dark room playing computer games for the whole of Easter weekend.
Wow.
And I thought, I cannot think of anything more depressing than have to do that, okay?
So you took the kids to this?
But both my kids said, Dad, 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 Dad. So we went and we rented a couple of computers, and it was absolutely amazing. Okay? From start to finish.
This isn't what's supposed to happen. It's gone the wrong way round.
It was brilliant, all right? And since then, I've bought them both computers. I've bought them anything that they want in terms of games, because we now are part of a community together. I speak to them every day. I get to play with them just about every other week. As the older they get, the more they separate. I get to take them away for the weekend, and even on these weekends, they have to camp outside. They have to serve for themselves. They have to look after themselves during the weekend. They have to communicate. They have to socialise. And when they're back at home in their bedrooms doing what they're doing, they're learning all the time. And some of these games, if you were to play them, you would see just how important to teamwork they are. And I've even employed people based on interview questions that have included the games that they play and what they've done on those games, because they are that. They are that advanced.
I don't need convincing of the brilliance of the games, and I mean, in some ways, there was a hinterland when actually you'd be playing a game, and your imagination would be working overdrive as well sometimes.
Yeah.
But now they're all encompassing. But they've still, I bet there's a bit of you that still wishes that you could go kayaking with them or mountain climbing.
Well, we still do.
Oh, you do that as well?
Do.
Oh, okay.
Because I have that relationship with them now where I have acquiesced, where I have said, let's measure this, let's work with you, let's do something that you want to do, and then the payoff is we're going to go and climb up Snowdon next weekend.
And they enjoy that, properly enjoy it.
Absolutely.
So you've found it. You've found the secret sauce. You've cracked it. You've hacked it.
Because you're in tune with them. If you're constantly telling them what they want is wrong and what they do is wrong, you're never really going to get any better with them. You're never really going to inspire them. So I'm quite proud of that achievement.
I bet you are.
Computer games are in no way evil. The only thing you've got to be a little bit careful of is what I call the monster of... what's it called?
You told the producer, I'm going to help you out. You call it the dopamine demon.
Dopamine demon, that's the one. Thank you. Sorry.
That's all right. She wrote it on the screen.
So the dopamine demon. So the instant reward of playing computer games and making sure you equalise that out across, ensuring they know that reality has those rewards as well. You just have to work harder for them. Yeah.
You sound great, man. And James been in touch says this guy's a legend. Gaming with the kids, that's how you do it, boss dad. But also doing other things with the kids as well, because everything in balance, everything and also in moderation, as you say, with the dopamine demon. What kind of games do you play together? Because on Tottenham Court Road, you might not know, but if you go out Charing Cross Road now, there's a few like gaming places which presumably have got computers that are just so powerful you can play games with no lag. But what sort of games are they? What sort of games do you play in a room with 3,000 other people and the curtains drawn?
Well, the truth of the matter is you play what you want.
Okay.
But if they'll have a competition. So for 2:00 in the afternoon, they will pick a game like Fortnite or Rust or any one of the battle group team, any one of the sort of group online games. PUBG is another really famous one that people like playing. And you will either be, one of them, you start naked on an island, you've got nothing, you've got to build a shelter, you've got to get your food, you've got to build a defence, and then you become sort of adversarial with other people on the island, and you're trying to build your own defensive base with your friends and so on. And you really do have to think about the mechanics and the the statistical information, the tactics, and you've got to work together with them so that they understand what it is that they're doing and how they're building it. There's all sorts of, there's millions of games out there. I think I've got.
No, I know. I didn't know. It's not a world I've really been in. I'm quite a solitary gamer, to be honest with you, except when I'm playing word games on the New York Times website. But I love what you describe. I really do. Yeah. And it is. I mean, crikey, it'd be mad, wouldn't it, to think that all of these technologies that are available now are all pointless to pursue because we used to play games when we were kids in the garden. Our kids must have childhoods exactly like ours. I mean, crikey, you'd never get in a car if you took that attitude back 100 years. The world has changed, and you recognise the change, but also recognise the things of value that possibly are getting a little bit sidelined and a little bit pushed away. So what do we learn from Paul? It's not either or. It's not either or. Isaac's in Warwick. Isaac, what made you pick up the phone?
Hiya. Well, I wanted to touch upon your question regarding the difference between Baldur's Gate and books. And I understand the premise that it's both fantasy and you're getting lost in this world.
Yes.
And it's exciting, but I think it's very fundamentally different, and one is far more damaging to a child than the other.
Go on. Tell me.
So I'm someone, I was born 2005. I've grown up, PlayStation releases, the sort of golden era.
Yeah.
And I grew up, playing these games a lot. And what I've learned is things like PlayStation, they're so predatory. These systems and algorithms developed by these corporations to keep you playing and to make you spend money. And the attention span that it requires, kids can be on there for 8 hours a day without fail easily. And I'd say it's a lot more damaging to someone's development than a book.
Why?
Well, for example, even physically...
You could sit there, you could read a book. I would have read a book for 8 hours a day when I was a nipper. I really would, if it was a good enough book. Tolkien being quite a good example, actually. I would have worked my way through The Lord of the Rings at a rate and not. So why would that be measurably better for me than playing a video game that involves perhaps a linear narrative where I'm exploring a world and making constant progress and solving perhaps mysteries and riddles and having the odd fight? This isn't a rhetorical question, or it's certainly not a gotcha. I just want to know what you think, because I sense that you're right, but I wonder if you can put it into words.
Well, I'd say there's two aspects in my mind at the moment. The first being physical, so your eyes being on a screen for that long every day.
True. Yeah, you've got
then
that.
You go to bed and you're on your phone. You go to work. You're on your laptop in future life. I'd say, from my experience, my posture's always been terrible in playing games. You're leaned in, you're close to the screen, and it's giving me back issues at the moment, to be honest. And
at the age of 21, you've got back issues, and you think that's down to gaming. Well, all right,
not significant.
I'll give you the physical. I'll give you the physical impact. And obviously, you're not exercising, and you're not getting fresh air. And so the physical side of it, that's it. You've won. That's a no-brainer. But what about the imaginative side? Why is it not in some way comparable? Why is one good and one bad when it comes to the exploring of an imaginary universe that someone else has imagined? An author on one hand and a games developer on the other.
I'd say it's not that black and white. I think there's definitely a role for games that, as the previous caller mentioned, it can be a lovely thing. But I'd say that the issue is stimulation. Mentally, in your brain when you're playing a game, it stimulates you so much more, and it can be really overstimulating for a child. And then when you go to do homework, you go to sit down, it feels really boring. Everything else is boring. You want to go outside, kick a ball, you make, calls you to go outside. That sounds more boring, to a young child. So I'd say parents need to be, I'm no one to lecture parents. I don't have any kids of my own.
At the grand old age of 21.
I know, right? But I just argue that moderation is so crucial in that sphere because it can be insanely addictive.
Yeah, insanely addictive, and that is bad. And yet, of course, as Paul before you reminded us, if you can manage it correctly, as you suggest yourself, Isaac, then you might end up being able to explore and enjoy the best of both possible worlds. When did your penny drop, if you don't mind me asking? When did you sort of shift from thinking, God, I can't think of anything better than spending 8 hours a day playing a game, to thinking, whoa, this ain't good?
I'd say exams. I noticed, especially around lockdown, my grades just tanked completely, and I came to realization that on these games, I'm great at them, but it's given me nothing in my life. It's added no value to me. When I leave the door, I have nothing.
Well, someone listening will be saying, well, you can actually now be a professional gamer, can't you?
Yes, but I mean, it's
a bit like being a professional footballer. It's a bit like being a professional footballer.
Yes, it's possible, but at least if you're playing football casually, you get a benefit. You're chatting with mates, you're exercising, you're outside. If you play a game, if they're doing too much, it's either go pro or you're wasting your life. You know?
No, I hear you. I hear you. You're not wasting your life, but you are wasting your life. I know what you mean. And that idea, that the benefit of boredom, is that a book? It's probably already been written. Has it already been written? I kind of need a new book subject. I've gone off the one I was going to write. The benefits of boredom. I want something that might have international impacts. Is it there? Eleanor's checking. Has anyone written it? Oh, I've just told you now. Someone else is going to nick it. Everyone... So, no, it's all been done. There's no new ideas under the sun. It's bad enough, tough enough being a phone-in host.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:49 is the time. What is the benefit of boredom? What are the benefits of boredom? I can pick up on a couple of texts that I disagree with. Gaming doesn't create memories. That makes it a waste of time. It does, actually. I don't know what your experiences are, David, but I have memories. There was a game I used to play as a kid called... Eureka, with an exclamation mark, by a software house called Domark, which, I'm such a weird memory, was set up by the grandson of Dennis Wheatley, who used to write all those satanic novels like The Devil Rides Out, many of which got turned into films starring people like Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. And they were quite an early independent software house, and they had this adventure game called Eureka that had a £25,000 prize. And you needed to solve all of the game and then a little booklet that came with it. And I never got close to winning the £25,000 prize, but I spent an entire summer holiday. So it was 5 adventure games set in 5 different historical eras. You had to escape from Colditz. There was one where you were a Roman soldier. There was one where you were a sort of almost a Neolithic, a sort of caveman, I think, figure in one of them. 5 different adventure games, and the old style ones where you type in, get helmet, wear helmet, get blankets, tie blankets, and then I remember those. They have given me memories. And I don't know if you ever find this sometimes, that maybe you need a certain type of imagination, not good or bad or better or worse, but I sometimes can't remember whether I read something or whether I saw a film. I've got like a visual memory of something, and I think, I read that, and I think, did you read that, or did you see the film, or I've seen the film, I haven't read the book. I get that with those type of video games, but I'm going way back now. Obviously, if you're playing the new James Bond game, First Light, which is brilliant, you might as well be watching a film. You're in a film. It is mad now, the technology and the realism of it. But I have memories of those games from when I was a kid. So this would be going back probably to 1987, summer of 1987, most of which I spent playing that game, dreaming of winning £25,000. And in my head, there's one little bit where you have to, I can give this away, right? No one's going to be sitting there thinking, James, I'm just stuck on that bit. I wanted to work it out for myself. There's one bit where you're in a machine gun post. I think you've escaped from Colditz. You're trying to get back to enemy lines, and someone throws a hand grenade. It's right at the end of the game. And if you died in these games, kids these days don't know they're born. If you died in these games, you had to go right back to the beginning. So it could be like a 2 or 3 hour journey that would take you 2 or 3 days, because every hurdle, every puzzle had to be solved, and every time you got it wrong or you died, you went back to the very beginning. You had to go through it all again, and it's right at the end of the World War II chapter, and you're in a sentry post. You're in an enemy sentry post, hiding from some Germans, and someone throws a hand grenade into the sentry post. You've got absolutely no idea what to do. You can't leave because they'll see you, they'll shoot you, and I can see that now. And in my mind, the imagery I have, because what you have to do is take your helmet off and then put the helmet on the hand grenade and lie on top of the helmet so that it explodes but is shielded by the helmet. You might get a bit wind. So I've got a mental image, David, of that. I've got a memory of that is as clear in my mind as if I had watched a film, or if I had read a book, or if I had been playing soldiers in the woods. I don't know whether that's remotely relevant to any of the conversation that we've been having this hour, but it's a very happy memory for me. Colin's in Belton. Colin, what made you pick up the phone?
Morning, James.
Hello, Colin.
So forgive me if I talk about something that's already been mentioned, but the thing that's been missed out of the screen time and the let's go out there and make a den. Things like interpreting facial expression. It's things about how do you take turns and negotiate rules? How do you adapt to unpredictable responses? Friends.
It's the phone line's got. Try and get Colin back because he's sounding brilliant, but the phone line unfortunately is not. Layla's in Manchester. Layla, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Yeah, I agree with what Colin was just about to say as well. Actually, that was really interesting.
How do you know what he was just? Are you psychic?
Potentially a little bit, but I think what I was thinking about more than necessarily whether it's online games or playing outside is I think it's really important not to villainize, make anything the villain, because we need to try to connect with our children, like Paul was saying earlier. But more than anything, I think sometimes what can be lost is when our children don't have the opportunity to be bored and don't have the time to have downtime in their own brains. We're losing the ability for them to be able to process what's happened in their day, to be able to think about something that maybe made them feel uncomfortable, maybe made them feel sad, maybe they're feeling worried about something, and they're not having any of the time to process those emotions and have those difficult feelings because they're constantly being stimulated and entertained. And so when they have big feelings that are coming up for them, I work with children in a mental health capacity. And so sometimes I see when children are having these big feelings coming up for them, they're so ill-equipped to deal with them because they've never had this happen and they've never had the thought of, well, I've got a little worry, but I'm going to think about that and process it. So when they have these big things that are happening, they find it super difficult. And this isn't all children, obviously, but that's a worry that I have for the lack of being able to be bored, the lack of just being able to be. I used to work with a really great man who used to say we're human beings, not human doings.
Yeah. Gosh, I like that.
We're losing our ability to just be human beings.
And just another word, if you would, on what the impact is, because I recognise well, it's resonating what you say, and I think you're obviously correct. But for a child who hasn't done this, who hasn't just sat with their thoughts, what are the negatives that engenders? You've already told me. I just want to hear you. I want to hear you say it again.
I suppose all children are different, but I think sometimes it's a real lack of being able to regulate their own emotions, to being able to understand that everybody feels worried, everybody feels sad. It doesn't mean the world's going to end or our problems are going to blow up in our faces, but
it's
just
funny,
to be
isn't
able
it?
to process it and deal with it.
Because a slightly unthinking adult talking to a child who's struggling might say, get used to it. And that's not helpful. And yet we do need to get used to it, don't we?
Yeah. It's almost like, when we're younger, our problems to adults seem small, but we have little problems that get bigger and bigger and bigger. Then when we get to teenagers, they're really big problems as for teenagers. And they're all these small problems that we're understanding and resolving and getting used to. And we're getting used to that uncomfortable feeling inside as when we're dealing with these problems.
Yes.
That when we get to adulthood, we're able to deal with bigger problems. And then when you become a parent, it's bigger problems. Or when you go into the world of work, it's bigger problems and more stress.
And
but if you never have the opportunity to build that resilience.
Because they distract themselves so easily from their problem, that the problem doesn't actually go away. It just gets filed away somewhere, waiting to bubble back to the surface in a completely different shape or form at some point in the future.
Yeah, it's just popped in a box and we don't deal with it.
Yeah, of course, because I'm actually not thinking about. So I suppose, it's why addicts often have, almost always, I think, have unresolved trauma, and you are distracting yourself from that trauma on a chemical level or on a psychoactive level. But if you're a child, it's not a trauma necessarily, but it's a problem, it's an anxiety, and you're distracting yourself from it by getting on your screen. And your brain will be 99% engaged with the stuff that's on your screen, and yet the problem or the anxiety that you were walking away from is entirely unresolved. Thank you, Layla. Oh, that was fun. I don't know if we've got any closer to the complete catch-all definition of the benefits of boredom, but I feel like we have. Sort of, maybe that's an act of imagination in and of itself. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or on the LBC app, where you can also stay up to date with all the latest news, videos and opinions. You can listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, the best bits from this show, every day. And, of course, Full Disclosure, which was with Tim Booth of James this week. I've had more lovely messages about that interview than I think any other Full Disclosure interview I've done. And it also contains a hint about the story I have vowed never to tell you, about my adventures in Tai Chi. Download the official LBC, but I'll never tell you about that. For LBC app for free from your app store now.
How many times did you do it?
About 4.
I did it once.
Yeah, how'd you get on?
I thought it might be magic.
Yes. So you stopped?
So I stopped.
Was this a Catholic response to the fearfulness, the hocus pocus? No, my story is much more embarrassing than that.
Oh, okay.
But I'm never going to tell it. Download the LBC app for free from your app store now. Tom's with you at 4, but here is Tai Chi.
It's pretty clear that the problem is you broke wind. Is that what happened? No?
Worse.
Okay. Worse?
I'll tell you off air. I'm not telling you on air.
I can't wait for this. Thank you, James.
James O'Brien on LBC.